Hello everyone, welcome to the Story Tales, your place for the best horror stories. For the next hour, I want you to put on your earphones, put your phone face down, and close your eyes. Relax, and let this story take you to a world full of chills and mystery. I've been listening to horror stories for years, and now I'm here to share the most amazing ones with you. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Sarah Mendez, and I've been working as a pizza delivery driver for about 9 months now. At first, it was just something to help pay the bills and get by while I was finishing up my studies at college. I didn't expect much from it, just a simple job, you know? But over time, I've seen a lot of strange things that have made me second-guess my choice. It was a Wednesday night when I got the delivery to 945 Westbrook Avenue. It didn't seem like anything special. The address looked like every other house on the block. Simple, suburban, the kind of place where nothing bad happens. The porch light was already on, casting a warm yellow glow on the front steps, and the lawn was neatly trimmed. The street was quiet, too quiet, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I checked the order, 2 large pepperoni pizzas, one of them extra crispy, the other with extra cheese. A standard order, nothing unusual. I glanced over the receipt, cash payment. As I climbed into my car, a slight unease settled in my stomach. I couldn't quite explain why, but I felt like something was off. Maybe it was just the fatigue from a long shift. I threw the heated pizza bag into the passenger seat of my old Honda Accord and drove the short distance to Westbrook Avenue. When I turned onto the street, everything looked normal. There were no signs of trouble, no loud parties, no cars parked in strange places. But as I pulled up to number 945, a feeling of dread washed over me. The house was just like every other one on the street. Tan exterior, brown shutters, a mailbox at the end of the driveway. But it didn't feel like home. It didn't feel safe. I parked the car, took a deep breath, and grabbed the pizza bag, making my way up the concrete path to the door. My work shoes made sharp clacks against the sidewalk. The air was thick, and the stillness of the neighborhood made my skin prickle. Not even a dog barked. When I rang the doorbell, everything seemed to slow down. It wasn't the typical cheerful chime that greeted you at most houses. It was almost muted. As the seconds ticked by, I began to feel an odd tension building in the air. It was strange, but I didn't want to leave. Something told me I shouldn't. The door creaked open just a few inches, enough to reveal a hand, a man's hand, wearing a long-sleeved black shirt. He reached out, the door barely opening wider. "Delivery?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Come in for a moment," the man said. His voice was cold, flat, no warmth, no emotion. It didn't feel like a simple request. It felt like an order. I didn't move. "I'll just leave the pizzas here," I said, holding them up for him to see. I tried to sound as professional as possible, but my heart was pounding in my chest. His hand shot out quickly, grabbing my wrist. It wasn't gentle. His fingers curled around me like a vice. His grip was strong, more than I expected, and for a moment, I thought he might break my wrist. I could feel my bones pressing together under the pressure. "Come inside," he repeated. This time, there was something almost menacing in his tone. I knew I couldn't let him control the situation. I jerked my arm back, but his grip didn't loosen. I looked at the pizzas in my hand, and suddenly they didn't feel like food anymore. They were my shield, my only defense. "No," I said firmly, trying to keep the panic from creeping into my voice. "I'm not coming inside. Just take the pizzas, and you can pay." The man's eyes narrowed. There was frustration there, but also something darker, something dangerous. I could feel it. The air around us seemed to get thicker, and every nerve in my body screamed at me to get away. Without thinking, I stepped back, holding the pizzas between us. I used them like a barrier, pushing them toward his chest. The boxes were hot, and I knew if he grabbed them, it would burn him. He flinched, pulling back slightly. I could feel the sweat trickling down my back as I backed up, one step after another. Something in his face changed then. A flicker of realization that I wasn't going to be an easy target. That's when I knew I had to act fast. I reached into the side pocket of my apron, where I kept a small canister of pepper spray. It was a precaution I had been taught to carry when I first started this job. Always be prepared. The man's expression shifted again. His eyes flashed with anger, and he took a step toward me, but I was ready. "I'm leaving now," I said, my voice sharp, strong. "You're not getting these pizzas. I'm calling the police." For a moment, neither of us moved. My heart was racing in my chest, but I held my ground. Something in my voice must have made him hesitate because he pulled back, his face twisting in frustration. The door began to close slowly. I didn't wait around. I dropped the pizzas on the porch with a thud and turned around, walking quickly back to my car. My hands were shaking, but I kept my movement steady. I didn't dare look back. I jumped into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut, and locked it. I didn't waste any time. My hands were still trembling as I pulled out my phone and dialed the number for the pizza shop. My manager picked up on the second ring. "Hello?" he said, his voice groggy. "Something's not right," I told him, my voice low but urgent. "I need you to call the police. The address is 945 Westbrook Avenue. There's a guy there. He tried to grab me. I'm not going back." My manager didn't question me. He said he'd handle it and that I should stay put, safe in my car. I hung up, still trembling, and sat there for a moment, staring at the front door of the house. The whole thing had been too strange, too wrong. When I called the police myself, they told me they were already on their way. They said there had been reports of similar incidents at that address before. They even said they were already investigating the place. I didn't feel relief right away. I still didn't understand what had happened, or what the man's intentions were. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going back to that house. Ever. The following morning, I woke up with a lingering sense of dread that clung to me like a heavy blanket. I had barely slept through the night, tossing and turning, my mind replaying the events of the previous evening. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still feel the man's grip around my wrist, the coldness in his voice, and the way his eyes had darkened when I refused him. I had never been more relieved to leave a delivery in my life, but the strange feeling didn't go away. In fact, it grew stronger as I thought about what had happened. I couldn't shake the thought that there was more to that house than I had seen. Something didn't add up. The way he had answered the door, no warmth, no urgency, just cold calculation. I couldn't help but wonder what exactly was going on at 945 Westbrook Avenue. I had gotten home around 2 a.m., but sleep had eluded me. The silence of the house seemed oppressive, as if it were hiding some dark secret. Even the hum of the refrigerator felt like an eerie background noise. It wasn't until my phone rang a few hours later that I had something to focus on other than my racing thoughts. "Hello?" I answered groggily, still half asleep. "Sarah, it's Mike, your manager." His voice came through the phone, clear and professional. "How are you holding up?" I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the fatigue. "I'm fine, I guess, just still kind of shaken." "I understand," Mike said. "Listen, I wanted to follow up on what happened last night. The police have been in touch with me, and they've asked for your statement. It seems like there's more going on at that address than we initially thought." That caught my attention. I sat up straight, suddenly alert. "What do you mean?" "There's been a string of reports from delivery drivers and service workers, Sarah, all with similar stories. Strange behavior, people getting too close, and in some cases even attempted assaults. It's not just you." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I wasn't the first one. The thought made me uneasy. It also made me angry. I wasn't the type of person to back down from a fight, but I had never imagined I'd be caught in something like this. "You're kidding," I muttered, trying to process the information. "No, and it gets worse," Mike said, his voice more serious now. "The guy at 945 Westbrook, the one you encountered, he's been linked to a lot of the incidents. They've been building a case against him for months." I felt my chest tighten. "Wait, are you telling me this guy has been doing this to other people, and they're just letting him get away with it?" "They've been working on gathering enough evidence," Mike said. "But your report was crucial in tying it all together. The police said they wouldn't have had enough to make an arrest without it. They've been investigating him for attempted assault charges, and last night's incident pushed them over the edge. They finally made the connection." I was silent for a long time. It was hard to take it all in. A part of me wanted to feel proud. After all, I had played a role in bringing him to justice. But another part of me was filled with questions. Who was this man? Why had he been targeting delivery drivers? And what had he wanted from me? "You're lucky," Mike continued. "I know it was a close call. The police are handling it now, but they'll want to talk to you later today. Are you okay with that?" I paused. The idea of speaking with the police made my stomach churn. But I knew I had to do it. I had seen enough to know that I couldn't just ignore what had happened. Someone needed to stop this guy before he hurt someone else. "Yeah," I finally said, my voice steady. "I'll be there." The police station wasn't too far from my apartment. I had been there a few times for minor issues, but nothing like this. It felt different, more serious. The moment I stepped inside, I was greeted by an officer, a woman in her late 30s who looked tired but determined. "You must be Sarah," she said, offering a firm handshake. "Detective Harris, we spoke on the phone last night. Thanks for coming in." "Of course," I replied, still feeling a little nervous. "I just want to help however I can." She led me down a hallway to a small room, bare except for a wooden table and a few chairs. It felt more like an interrogation room, but I knew they were just trying to get the details straight. I took a seat across from her, and she sat down as well, her notebook already open. "Let's start with your statement," Detective Harris said. "Tell me everything that happened last night. Start from the moment you arrived at 945 Westbrook Avenue." I took a deep breath, then began to recount everything. I described the house, the quiet street, and the unease that had settled in when I rang the doorbell. I told her about the man's cold demeanor, how he'd reached out to grab me, and how I had resisted, using the pizzas to push him away. I even told her about my instincts, the feeling that something wasn't right, that I needed to get out of there as fast as possible. Detective Harris took notes as I spoke, nodding every now and then. When I finished, she looked up from her notebook and met my gaze. "You did the right thing," she said. "It's clear you were in a dangerous situation, and your instincts saved you. I'm glad you followed them." I nodded, but the relief didn't come as easily as I thought it would. I kept thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't been so quick to act. What if I had gone inside, like he had asked? What if I hadn't been so careful? "Now, about the man you encountered," Detective Harris continued, her tone changing slightly. "His name is Aaron Fletcher. He's been on our radar for a while now. He's been involved in several other incidents, mostly targeted at delivery workers. He has a history of violent behavior, though he's never been fully caught in the act." I swallowed hard. "So you've been after him for a while?" "Yeah. We've been trying to connect the dots for months," she explained. "Fletcher has a pattern. He waits for deliveries or service workers to come to his door, then tries to lure them inside. Some of the other workers have reported similar experiences, where he'd try to trap them in his house, sometimes making physical advances. A few of them managed to escape, but others weren't so lucky." The air seemed to grow thicker, and I could feel my pulse quicken. This wasn't just some random encounter. I had been one of many. But now that I had a name, Aaron Fletcher, the whole situation felt even darker. What was this man doing? What did he want with us? "So you think he was going to hurt me?" asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We don't know for sure," Detective Harris said, her expression grim. "But based on the other reports we've gathered, it's likely. He's been escalating his behavior, and your report was the final piece we needed to get a warrant for his arrest." I shivered despite myself. "Do you think he'll try again? Is he still out there?" "He's been arrested," Harris assured me. "We took him in last night right after we got your statement. He's not going anywhere for a while, but we're still investigating to see if there are more victims out there. If you remember anything else, anything at all, don't hesitate to contact us." I nodded, feeling a little more at ease. But I wasn't sure how to feel. Yes, Fletcher was behind bars, but the lingering feeling of dread had yet to leave me. I couldn't forget the way he had looked at me, the cold, calculating way he had reached out. What if he had been planning this for months, years even? What if he wasn't the only one out there? As I stood to leave, Harris handed me a card with her contact information. "If you ever need anything, or if anything else comes to mind, give me a call. And thank you, Sarah. You've helped us more than you know." That night, I found myself unable to sleep again. The thought of Aaron Fletcher still haunted me. I kept thinking about how close I had come to danger, how easily things could have gone wrong. But despite everything, a small part of me felt a sense of relief. The police had him now. He wasn't going to hurt anyone else. At least that's what I told myself. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. There were still too many unanswered questions, too many things left unsaid. And one thought echoed in my mind over and over again. If I hadn't trusted my instincts that night, would I have been his next victim? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't stop until I found them. The next few days passed in a blur. I went through the motions, working my shifts at the pizza place, attending college classes, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. But the nagging thought that something wasn't right wouldn't leave me. Despite the arrest of Aaron Fletcher, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. I knew I was probably overthinking it, but I couldn't help myself. The more I thought about it, the more it felt like there were pieces missing. The police had assured me that Fletcher was in custody, that he wouldn't be able to hurt anyone else. Yet something about it didn't sit right with me. How could someone like him have been targeting so many people for so long without anyone noticing? And why was I the one to finally connect the dots? I tried to focus on other things, but even when I was with my friends, that feeling of unease lingered. They had all heard about what happened, and they'd been supportive, but I could tell they didn't fully understand. How could they? They hadn't been there with me, hadn't felt the cold grip of fear wrap around them the way I had. It was one afternoon, a week after the incident, when I decided to take matters into my own hands. I couldn't just sit back and wait for the police to do all the work. I needed answers. If Fletcher had been targeting delivery drivers and service workers, maybe there were more clues to be uncovered. Maybe there were others out there who had experienced what I had. Maybe, just maybe, there was something deeper going on. I wasn't sure how to begin, but I knew one thing. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I went to the library after class. The place was quiet, almost deserted in the middle of the afternoon. I sat at one of the tables, pulling out my laptop, trying to figure out how to start. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I stared at the screen. Where should I look first? The police had said they were investigating Fletcher, but that didn't mean everything was in the clear. If there was anything more to find, I had to dig for it myself. I started with the basics. I pulled up Fletcher's name, checking public records, searching for anything that might shed light on his past. At first, it seemed like a dead end. Most of the information was vague, nothing more than arrest records and a few mentions of minor offenses. But then I stumbled upon something interesting. It was a local news article, buried deep in the archives of a small-town newspaper. The headline caught my attention. "Delivery driver found injured outside Westbrook Avenue, foul play suspected." My heart skipped a beat. Westbrook Avenue. the same street where I had delivered the pizzas. I clicked on the link, eager to know more. The article was brief, only a few paragraphs long, but it told me enough. A delivery driver had been found on the sidewalk outside a house on Westbrook Avenue. Ironically, the very same address where I had encountered Fletcher. He was injured, but not seriously. The report mentioned that the man had been knocked unconscious, but there were no witnesses, and the police had no leads. The only detail that stood out was the driver's account of feeling watched in the area, though he couldn't explain why. My blood ran cold. That was it. That was the missing link. This wasn't the first time something strange had happened on that street, and Fletcher wasn't the only one involved. My mind raced as I processed the information. How many other incidents had there been? What was going on that I didn't know about? I didn't stop there. I continued searching, following the trail of articles and news reports, digging through everything I could find. It was like unraveling a tangled web, and the deeper I went, the more twisted it became. There were other reports of deliveries gone wrong, of service workers being targeted, each with a strange, unsettling similarity. They all mentioned Westbrook Avenue, and they all pointed to the same house. But nothing had ever fully connected the dots, until now. My hands shook as I scrolled through the final article, one that sent a chill down my spine. It was from 3 years ago, but it was more detailed than the others. The headline read, "Local man arrested for attempted assault at delivery driver's home." The article explained that a man named Aaron Fletcher had been caught attempting to assault a delivery driver in his home, but there were no charges filed at the time. Why? Because the police had no concrete evidence to back up the claim, and the delivery driver had left the scene before they could get a clear statement. The article ended abruptly, and I could tell something was off. No charges, no explanation. How could someone who had been involved in such an incident just walk free? I closed the laptop, feeling a strange mix of unease and determination. I had to know more. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, but I couldn't piece it all together alone. There had to be someone who knew more, someone who could help me understand what I was looking at. I decided to call Detective Harris. She had been helpful before, and I hoped that maybe, just maybe, she could shed some light on the things that were left unsaid. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number. "Detective Harris," she answered on the second ring. Her voice was calm, professional, but there was a hint of fatigue in her tone. "Hi, Detective. It's Sarah. I've been looking into some things, and I think I found something that might be important." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a sigh. "Sarah, I've told you before, we're still investigating the case. If you have any new information, you need to let us know, but please don't do anything on your own. It could put you in danger." I understood the warning. I know. I can't shake the feeling that there's more to this. I found a few articles about incidents on Westbrook Avenue, specifically involving deliveries and service workers, and some of them mention Aaron Fletcher. But there's something strange. It seems like some of these reports have just been ignored, like they were covered up. There was another pause, and I could hear the faint sound of pages turning on the other end of the line. "You've been digging into this on your own?" Yeah, I have. I know it's probably not a good idea, but I've got to know more. I feel like something's being hidden, Detective. I found articles about Fletcher, some older ones, and it doesn't add up. It's like he's been getting away with this for years." "I see," Harris said slowly. "You might be onto something, Sarah, but you need to stop this. Whatever's going on, it's bigger than you think, and I can't afford to have you getting mixed up in it." "I understand, but you don't think there's something more here? Something that hasn't come to light?" There was a long silence, then a deep breath on the other end of the line. "I'm going to tell you something, but you have to promise me that you won't take matters into your own hands again. You've already been involved enough. You've done your part. The police are handling it now." "I promise," I said, my voice tight with anticipation. Harris hesitated, then spoke quietly. Fletcher isn't working alone. There are others involved, others who've been helping him target delivery drivers. But what we haven't been able to figure out is why. There's a larger network at play here, one that's been operating under the radar for years. And Fletcher, well, he's just the tip of the iceberg. My stomach dropped. A network? A group of people working together? It was starting to feel like something out of a crime thriller. But this was real, and I was right in the middle of it. You need to stay safe, Harris warned. I don't know how deep this goes, but we're going to find out. Just don't try to be a hero, okay? Okay, I whispered. But in my heart, I knew that I couldn't stop now. I couldn't turn my back on the truth, not when I was this close. The call ended with a quiet click, and I sat there in the library for a moment, letting the weight of her words sink in. The pieces were falling into place, but now the real question was, how far did this go? How many people were involved in this twisted web of deceit? I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to stop until I uncovered the truth. The phone call with Detective Harris left me feeling more unsettled than ever before. There were others involved, others who had been helping Aaron Fletcher. The realization gnawed at me like a splinter lodged deep within my mind. Who were they? What were they after? And how had I, a simple delivery driver, gotten caught up in something so dangerous? The days that followed were a blur of restless nights and anxious days. I couldn't stop thinking about what Harris had said. There's a larger network at play here. It was like a secret society, hidden right under everyone's noses, and now I had somehow become a part of it. But there was still so much I didn't know, and I knew I couldn't stop until I uncovered the full extent of what was happening. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had only scratched the surface. I went back to my shifts at the pizza place trying to focus on work, but my mind was a constant whirlwind of questions. The streets I'd driven down 1,000 times before now felt different, as though the pavement beneath my feet was hiding secrets I wasn't meant to uncover. I drove past Westbrook Avenue every day, the house where Fletcher had been arrested standing like a silent monument to the mystery I was unraveling. Every time I looked at it, I felt a chill in the air, an unspoken warning. I'd heard the rumors about the house on Westbrook Avenue before, but I hadn't thought much of them. Now those rumors felt like they were part of the puzzle I was trying to piece together. It was a Saturday night when everything took an unexpected turn. The pizza shop was busier than usual, with orders piling up faster than we could process them. The constant hum of the kitchen, the beep of the register, the chatter of customers, all felt like white noise to me as I worked. My mind was somewhere else. And that's when it happened. I was getting ready to leave for my last delivery of the night when my manager, Tom, stopped me. "Sarah, I need you to take this one. The usual driver's out sick." I glanced down at the order sheet. It was a special request: 2 large meat lovers pizzas, an extra large cheese, and a couple of garlic knots. Simple enough. But what caught my attention was the address. It was 105 Westbrook Avenue. I froze, my stomach sinking. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as the memories of the past few weeks flooded my mind. The house, Fletcher, the incidents. This wasn't just another order. This was a warning. Tom must have sensed my hesitation because he raised an eyebrow. "What's wrong? You okay?" I forced a smile, trying to mask the unease creeping up my spine. "Yeah, I'm fine. I just didn't expect it to be on Westbrook Avenue. I'll take care of it." "All right," he said, clearly not convinced, but he didn't press further. "Just be careful. That area has been having a lot of issues lately." I nodded absently, my thoughts already racing. Was it coincidence that this order was going to the same street where I had almost been attacked? Or was it something more? I couldn't let fear control me, but I couldn't ignore the gut feeling telling me that something was wrong. I grabbed the order, stuffed it into my delivery bag, and headed out to my car. As I drove toward Westbrook Avenue, the familiar street seemed darker than usual, the air heavier. I kept glancing at my rearview mirror, half expecting someone to be following me, though I knew that was irrational. But the paranoia was there, festering under my skin. When I turned onto Westbrook Avenue, I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. The street was quiet, the houses lined up in neat rows, just like the first time I had delivered there. It looked like any other suburban street, ordinary and unremarkable. But I knew better now. There was something hidden beneath the surface. I drove past the house where Fletcher had been arrested, but I didn't slow down. The house at 105 Westbrook Avenue was a few doors down, and I knew that this was where I needed to be. I parked my car, grabbed the pizzas, and made my way to the front door. My steps were slow, deliberate. The porch light above me flickered as I walked up the path, casting an eerie glow over the front door. I paused for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorbell, but something made me hesitate. I shook off the feeling and rang the bell. The door opened, but not in the way I expected. It was a crack, just wide enough to reveal a shadowy figure standing behind it. A man, wearing a dark hoodie, his face hidden in the dim light. He didn't say anything, just stood there watching me. His eyes were cold, unblinking. "Delivery," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "2 meat lovers, 1 extra large cheese, and garlic knots." The man didn't respond. Instead, he stepped back, opening the door wider, and motioned for me to come inside. I froze. My pulse hammered in my chest. I knew better than to go inside. I'd learned my lesson with Fletcher. My training kicked in, but my body was frozen in place. I'll just leave the pizzas here," I said, holding them out to him. "Cash or card?" The man didn't move. He didn't even reach for the pizzas. He just kept staring at me. His silence was unnerving, his presence overwhelming. I felt like I was being pulled into something, like there was no way out if I stepped over that threshold. Something wasn't right. My instincts were screaming at me to get out of there, to run, but I didn't. Not yet. "Come inside," the man repeated, his voice low and rasping, like a whisper carried on the wind. There was no hint of warmth or friendliness, just a cold, empty command. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes fixed on him. I wasn't going inside, not for anything, but something about this felt different. This wasn't just a delivery gone wrong. This was part of something much larger, something that I couldn't fully understand yet, but I was close. I could feel it in my bones. "I'm leaving now," I said firmly, taking another step back. "I'm not coming inside." For the first time, the man moved. His hand shot out, grabbing the doorframe with a tight grip, his fingers digging into the wood like he was trying to hold himself back. "Wait," he said, and his voice was sharp, desperate. "You don't know who you're dealing with. You have no idea." I took another step back, my heart pounding. "I know enough," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "And I'm leaving." Before I could turn and run, the door slammed shut. The man was gone. The house was silent again, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. There was something dangerous in there, something I wasn't ready to confront yet. I dropped the pizzas on the porch and ran back to my car, my breath coming in short, ragged bursts. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The weight of the situation was too much. I had barely made it out, and I knew I was only scratching the surface of something much bigger. When I got home, I locked every door and window, double-checking them just to be sure. I was shaking, my hands trembling as I dialed Detective Harris's number. I didn't know what to say or how to explain it, but I had to warn her. She answered on the second ring. "Sarah, are you okay?" "I don't know," I said, my voice unsteady. I went to 105 Westbrook Avenue. The man who answered the door, he was different. He said something strange. He said I didn't know who I was dealing with. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Did he do anything? Did he threaten you?" "No, but he made it clear that something's going on, that I don't know everything, and I think there's more to this than we realized. This isn't just about Fletcher. There's a bigger picture here. I agree, Harris said quietly. But you need to stay safe, Sarah. We'll take it from here. I'll send someone to check out the address. I can't just walk away from this, Detective, I replied, my voice firm. I'm not going to stop until I find out what's really going on. There was another long pause before Harris spoke again, her voice soft but filled with urgency. Don't go back there, please. You're in over your head. Leave this to the police. But I knew something that Harris didn't. The more I learned, the more I realized. I couldn't trust anyone but myself. If I was going to survive this, I had to keep digging. I had to keep going. The truth was out there, and I was going to find it. The night dragged on after my call with Detective Harris, the silence in my apartment making my mind race faster than ever before. The words, "You don't know who you're dealing with," echoed in my thoughts, louder and louder. They were a warning, a signal that something far more dangerous than I could have imagined was lurking just beneath the surface of my life. The closer I got to the truth, the more I realized how deep this rabbit hole went. I hadn't told Detective Harris everything, though. I didn't trust her, or anyone at this point, to understand. It wasn't just a feeling I had. I couldn't shake the suspicion that Harris was either hiding something or wasn't as involved as she let on. Maybe she didn't even know how far this went. The next morning, I barely slept. The unease of last night weighed heavily on me as I got ready for work. I kept thinking about the man from 105 Westbrook Avenue. There was something about his eyes. They were hollow, as though he wasn't just a person, but a vessel for something more sinister. The message he had tried to send was clear: leave it alone. But I wasn't ready to walk away. Not yet. I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't let it end here. The pizza shop was chaotic when I arrived. The usual rush of hungry customers, mixed with the frustration of overworked staff. Tom gave me a brief nod as I walked in, but I could tell his eyes were heavy with concern. He had heard the rumors, too. He knew about the strange events at Westbrook Avenue, but he didn't ask questions. In this business, you kept your head down and just did your job. Got a big one for you tonight, Sarah, Tom said as I grabbed my apron. Delivery to 2125 Maple Road. Sounds pretty standard, but it's a big order. 3 extra large pies and 4 sides. The usual deal, okay? I nodded, glancing at the order slip. My mind was elsewhere, still stuck on Westbrook Avenue. The way the man had stared at me like he knew something I didn't. What was it? I asked myself as I started prepping for the delivery. I couldn't get it out of my head. The clock ticked on, and by the time the order was ready, the anxiety inside me had grown unbearable. It wasn't just fear. It was something more primal, a sense of urgency, as though something was waiting for me just beyond the veil of normalcy. I grabbed the pizza bag, stuffing it with the large boxes and sides. Tom handed me a stack of cash with a forced smile. "Take care out there, okay?" he said, his voice low, as though he knew something was wrong but didn't know what to do about it. "I will," I replied, my voice tight. I wasn't even sure if I was convincing myself. As I drove through the city, the familiar streets seemed somehow foreign now. I passed Westbrook Avenue without slowing down, though the temptation to pull over, to confront whatever was waiting there, almost overwhelmed me. But I resisted. Not yet. I had to finish this delivery first. I had to keep my focus. Maple Road was about a 20-minute drive from the pizza place. It was a nice area, with well-kept lawns and cozy little houses, each one looking more or less the same as the next. But there was an unsettling sense of emptiness in the air as I pulled up in front of the destination. 2125 Maple Road wasn't like the other houses. It stood at the end of the block, isolated from the others by a small patch of trees and a long, winding driveway. It wasn't particularly grand, but something about it felt off. The windows were dark, the front door locked behind a rusted gate that seemed to be unused for years. Yet, as I got out of the car and walked up to the front porch, a feeling of being watched crept over me. I rang the doorbell, and my breath caught in my chest when the door swung open almost immediately. A man stood in the doorway, tall and thin, dressed in a faded black suit. His face was pale, almost sickly, and he had a cold smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You're here," he said, his voice smooth and detached. "We've been expecting you." The words sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just a delivery. Maple Road was about a 20-minute drive from the pizza place. It was a nice area with well-kept lawns and cozy little houses, each one looking more or less the same as the next. But there was an unsettling sense of emptiness in the air as I pulled up in front of the destination. 2125 Maple Road wasn't like the other houses. It stood at the end of the block, isolated from the others by a small patch of trees and a long, winding driveway. It wasn't particularly grand, but something about it felt off. The windows were dark, the front door locked behind a rusted gate that seemed to be unused for years. Yet as I got out of the car and walked up to the front porch, a feeling of being watched crept over me. I rang the doorbell, and my breath caught in my chest when the door swung open almost immediately. A man stood in the doorway, tall and thin, dressed in a faded black suit. His face was pale, almost sickly, and he had a cold smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You're here," he said, his voice smooth and detached. "We've been expecting you." The words sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just a delivery. I had become part of something larger, and I was only beginning to realize how far it went. "Delivery for 21 and 25 Maple Road," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the unease threatening to overwhelm me. "2 extra large meat lovers, 1 supreme, and 4 garlic knots." The man stepped aside, silently inviting me in. My instincts screamed at me not to enter, to turn around and leave. But I ignored them, stepping over the threshold into the dimly lit hallway. The door closed behind me with a soft click that echoed too loudly in the silence. The inside of the house was unnervingly quiet, as though no one had lived here for years. The walls were lined with dusty old paintings and strange artifacts I didn't recognize. The air smelled stale, like it hadn't been properly ventilated in a long time. The man led me into a small dining room, where a large table was set with fine china, almost like a showpiece for someone who didn't care about using it. The night was silent, and the weight of the envelope in my hand seemed to grow heavier with each step I took. As I walked back to my car, my mind was racing, thoughts colliding with each other, trying to piece together the fragments of this nightmare I had unwillingly become part of. 2745, Darkwood Lane. The words echoed in my mind like a persistent chant, the address now etched in my brain. It was only a matter of time before I reached it. But what was waiting for me there? I had no clear answers, no real plan. The fear that had been growing in me since that first strange encounter at 105 Westbrook Avenue was now an unrelenting force, driving me forward. The man in the house with the fine china had been just one piece of a puzzle I didn't understand. His cryptic message, "There's no turning back," only added to the weight I carried. What did he mean by that? Was I walking straight into a trap, or was there something more? My car hummed quietly as I drove through the night, the headlights cutting through the darkened streets. I glanced at the address again, 2745 Darkwood Lane. I had no idea what I was about to walk into. But one thing was certain. This wasn't just about pizza deliveries anymore. It never had been. I was no longer the same person who had stepped into 105 Westbrook Avenue all those weeks ago. That encounter had changed everything. And now, there was no turning back. The more I thought about it, the more questions piled up. Who were the people behind this? What did they want from me? And most importantly, why had they chosen me? I had been an ordinary pizza delivery girl, living a life that was as average as it could be. Now, I was entangled in something far more sinister, and I had no way of knowing how deep it went. I turned onto Darkwood Lane, and everything became even more surreal. The street was dimly lit, the houses sparsely spaced apart, their windows dark. The air seemed heavier here, as though it held its breath in anticipation of something terrible. As I approached the address, I noticed the house standing tall at the end of the lane, looming ominously in the darkness. It was a house unlike any I had seen before. Old, dilapidated, with peeling paint and overgrown shrubs that clung to the exterior like they were trying to pull the house back into the earth. The wind rustled through the trees, but the air felt suffocating. There was no welcoming light, no sounds of life. It was as though the house itself had been abandoned by time. I parked the car across the street, staring at the house. A deep chill crawled up my spine, but I couldn't stop now. This was the end of the road, the final clue. It had to be. I had come this far. I grabbed the envelope from my seat and stepped out of the car, my heart thumping wildly. The sound of my footsteps felt unnaturally loud in the stillness of the night. With every step I took toward the house, the feeling of unease grew stronger. My breath came in short, shallow bursts, the anticipation clawing at me. The front door stood ajar, as if waiting for me. It was the same kind of invitation I had received before at 105 Westbrook Avenue, a silent beckoning. But this time, something felt different. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. I stepped inside without a second thought, the door creaking softly as it closed behind me. The interior was dark, but I could make out the outline of old furniture draped in sheets, covered in dust and forgotten by time. The musty smell of decay hung in the air, and the silence pressed in on me from all sides. As I ventured deeper into the house, I noticed the faint glow of a single light at the far end of the hallway. I followed it. The room was at the back of the house, another dining room, this time much larger than the one I had seen before. The light came from a single lamp hanging above a long wooden table. At the table sat several figures, their faces obscured by shadows, their postures rigid and still. They didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence. But I could feel their eyes on me, cold and unblinking. I froze at the threshold, suddenly unsure of what to do. My mind screamed at me to leave, to turn around and run. But I couldn't. Something inside me was drawing me forward. It wasn't just curiosity. It was something darker, a pull I couldn't explain. "Come in, Sarah," a voice suddenly said. It wasn't a voice I recognized, but it wasn't unfamiliar either. The voice felt like it was coming from all around me, from the shadows themselves. It was calm, yet there was an underlying edge of menace in it. I swallowed hard, but my feet moved almost on their own, carrying me into the room. As I stepped closer, the figures at the table stirred, their eyes gleaming with something I couldn't understand. One of them, an older man with a weathered face and thin lips, rose slowly from his chair. He didn't speak. He just reached for a large envelope on the table and handed it to me. I took it without thinking. My hands trembled as I unfolded the flap. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper. It was a photo. The photo was of me. I stared at it, my heart racing. It was a picture of me from a few weeks ago, walking into the pizza place after my shift. But there was something wrong with it. The photo wasn't just a picture, it was a detailed close-up of me, taken at a time I hadn't even noticed anyone watching. My breath caught in my throat as I realized that the person who had been stalking me wasn't just following me. They had been observing me from afar for weeks, possibly even longer. "Why?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Why me?" The man didn't answer at first. He simply watched me with those piercing eyes, eyes that seemed to see straight through me. Then finally he spoke. "You're the one," he said quietly, his voice cold. "You've always been the one. The others, those who came before you, they were just distractions. You, Sarah, you're the key." "The key?" I repeated, my voice shaky. "What do you mean?" The man smiled, a cruel twist of his lips that sent a shiver down my spine. "It's simple," he said. "You were always meant to uncover the truth. You've been led here. It was never about the pizzas or the deliveries, it was about you." I felt a chill run through me. "Led here?" I asked, confused and terrified. What are you talking about? Another figure at the table, a woman, her face hidden beneath a veil, spoke then. Her voice was as soft as a whisper, but there was no mistaking the malice in it. The truth is, Sarah, she said, that we've been watching you for a long time. You've been chosen to be part of something much bigger than yourself. The truth you seek, the answers you've been looking for, they're right here. But understand this, once you've taken the next step, there's no turning back. You'll become one of us, or you'll disappear forever. My stomach churned. No, I said, stepping back. I don't want any part of this. But the man's voice was sharp, commanding. It's already too late. You've already made your choice. Now, you either join us or become our enemy. I turned and bolted for the door. The figures didn't move to stop me, but the pressure in the air, the feeling of being trapped, intensified with every step I took. I ran outside, my heart racing, and didn't stop until I was back in my car. As I drove away from the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Something that knew everything about me. And as much as I wanted to forget it all, I knew I couldn't. They would never let me go. The nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. But in the end, I had no choice but to keep moving forward. Because in this game, once you were in, you could never truly escape. Let me tell you about something that happened when I was a kid. A night I'll never forget, no matter how hard I try. It was Halloween, way back in 1985. I was 11 years old and excited for my favorite night of the year. My name's Charlie, by the way. Back then, I was in 6th grade, and Halloween meant costumes, candy, and running around the neighborhood with my friends like we owned the streets. I grew up in a small town called Maplewood. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. My best friends were Wesley and Caleb. Wesley was the funny one, always cracking jokes, and Caleb was the smart one, always coming up with cool plans. We were all planning to meet up for some trick-or-treating, just like we did every year. But that year something felt different. The first sign that Halloween was going to be weird came from my mom. She wasn't usually very strict, but that year she seemed super worried about me going out. She asked me a million questions: who I was going with, where we were going, how long we'd be out. It was like she didn't trust me all of a sudden. When I told her I was heading out to meet Wesley and Caleb, she shook her head. "Not this year, Charlie," she said. "You're going with Mrs. Hargrove and her group." Mrs. Hargrove was our next-door neighbor. She was nice, but kind of strict. She had a daughter named Eliza, who was 9, and a little brother, Sam, who was only 7. My heart sank. I didn't want to go with a bunch of younger kids and a chaperone. I wanted freedom. But Mom didn't budge. "It's Mrs. Hargrove's group, or you're staying home," she said. So reluctantly, I put on my pirate costume and waited for Mrs. Hargrove to show up. When she did, she had Eliza, Sam, and another boy named Felix with her. Felix was a little older than Eliza and Sam, maybe 10, but he was super shy. I could already tell this was going to be a boring night. We started walking down the street, going from house to house. Mrs. Hargrove kept us on a short leash, only letting us go up the driveways in pairs. Eliza was dressed as a fairy, Sam as a robot, and Felix was a vampire. I remember thinking his costume was pretty cool because he had fake blood dripping from his fangs. At first, everything seemed normal. We'd knock on doors, yell trick or treat, and get candy. But as we moved further down the block, I noticed something strange. Other groups of kids were being chaperoned too, which was odd. The year before, the streets had been full of kids running around on their own. Now every group had an adult keeping a close eye. We were about 20 minutes into trick-or-treating when we came to a house with a long line of kids waiting at the door. Mrs. Hargrove started chatting with another parent, so we were standing there for a while. That's when Felix nudged me and whispered, "Look over there." I followed his gaze and saw a figure standing near the edge of the park across the street. It was a kid, wearing a mask, something green and creepy looking, like a goblin. He wasn't with a group. and he wasn't knocking on doors. He was just standing there watching. "Why's he by himself?" Felix asked. "I don't know," I said. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off about him. Mrs. Hargrove must have noticed us staring because she turned around and saw the kid too. "Hey," she called out, "you need to stay with your group." The kid didn't move at first. He just stood there staring at us. Then slowly he started walking toward us. His movements were jerky, like he wasn't sure how to walk properly. Mrs. Hargrove frowned. "Whose group are you with?" she asked. "Where's your adult?" The kid didn't answer. He stopped a few feet away, just staring at us through his mask. Up close, the mask was even creepier. It had sharp teeth and big, hollow eyes. I remember feeling my stomach twist. Before Mrs. Hargrove could say anything else, the kid reached into his candy bag and pulled out something shiny. It took me a second to realize it was a knife. Everything happened so fast after that. The kid lunged at a boy in the group behind us, slashing at his arm. The boy screamed, and suddenly everyone was yelling and running. Mrs. Hargrove grabbed Eliza and Sam, pulling them close, while Felix and I just froze, too scared to move. An adult from another group tackled the masked kid, grabbing the knife. But the kid didn't stop struggling. He was screaming and thrashing, trying to break free. Eventually, the police arrived and took the kid away. I learned later that he wasn't a kid at all. He was a teenager, someone who used to go to our school but had been sent away for reasons no one wanted to talk about. The boy he attacked was okay, just a few stitches in his arm, but the whole town was shaken. Halloween was never the same after that. The next year, there were no trick-or-treaters on the streets. Everyone was too scared. And as for me, I still love Halloween, but I'll never forget that night. Sometimes when the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear the faint sound of a goblin's laughter echoing through the trees. After the police took the masked kid away, Mrs. Hargrove decided that trick-or-treating was over for the night. She marched us straight back to her house, her face pale and her hands shaking. None of us said a word the whole way. Felix stayed close to me, his eyes darting around as if the goblin-masked kid might jump out of the shadows. When we got back, Mrs. Hargrove called my mom and explained everything. My mom showed up at her door within minutes, her face full of worry. She thanked Mrs. Hargrove for keeping me safe, but I could tell she was shaken too. "Charlie," she said, putting her hands on my shoulders. "Are you okay?" I nodded, but I didn't feel okay. My hands were clammy and my heart was still racing. Mom walked me back home, holding my hand the whole way. When we got inside, she made me sit down in the kitchen while she poured me a glass of milk. "What happened, honey? Tell me everything," she said. I told her about the kid in the mask, how he'd just stood there watching us, and how he'd pulled out the knife. I told her how scared I'd been when he attacked the boy in the other group. Mom listened quietly, her face growing more serious with every word. When I was done, she hugged me tightly. "I'm so glad you're safe," she said. "You did the right thing by staying close to Mrs. Hargrove." The next morning, the whole town was buzzing about what had happened. People were calling it the Halloween night incident. Parents were furious, demanding to know how someone so dangerous had been allowed to roam the streets. At school, everyone was talking about it. Even kids who hadn't been there claimed they'd seen the goblin-masked kid or had just narrowly escaped his attack. Stories were flying around like wildfire, and they got wilder with every retelling. Some kids said the masked boy wasn't even human, that he was some kind of monster who came out on Halloween to hunt kids. Others said he was a ghost, the spirit of a boy who had died in the park years ago. I didn't believe those stories, but I couldn't stop thinking about the boy. Why had he done it? Why was he dressed like that? And why did he seem so familiar? That night, I had trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the goblin mask. I dreamed that I was back on the street, standing in line at the house, but this time, the masked boy wasn't across the park. He was standing right behind me. In the dream, I turned around, and he pulled off his mask. His face was pale and thin, his eyes wide and unblinking. He opened his mouth to speak, but instead of words, I heard laughter. cold and hollow, like it was echoing from deep underground. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, something clicked in my mind. I remembered where I'd seen that kid before. His name was Jacob. He'd been a grade or two ahead of me in school, but I hadn't seen him in years. Back then, he was quiet and kept to himself. Kids used to pick on him a lot, calling him weird and making fun of his clothes. I remembered one time in particular. A bunch of older kids had surrounded him in the park, taunting him and calling him names. I hadn't done anything to stop it, I just stood there and watched. Now I couldn't help but wonder, was that why he'd snapped? Was he angry at the world for how he'd been treated? Over the next few weeks, things in Maplewood didn't feel the same. Parents were more protective than ever. Kids weren't allowed to play outside after dark. Halloween decorations were taken down early, and there was talk of canceling trick-or-treating altogether the next year. But it wasn't just the rules that had changed. Something about the town itself felt different. It was quieter, heavier, like there was a shadow hanging over it. People whispered about the incident, but no one seemed to know what had happened to Jacob after he was taken away. Some said he'd been sent to a mental hospital. Others claimed he'd been locked up in juvenile detention. But there were rumors, whispers among the kids at school, that he'd escaped. A year passed, and Halloween came around again. This time, there were no groups of kids running through the streets. Instead, there was a community event at the school gym. Parents set up tables with candy and kids walked around in their costumes collecting treats in the brightly lit gym. It was safer, but it wasn't the same. I went with Wesley and Caleb, and we tried to make the best of it. But the whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Every time I turned around, I half expected to see the goblin mask. As we were leaving the gym, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Across the parking lot, near the edge of the woods, stood a figure in a green goblin mask. "Do you see that?" I whispered to Wesley and Caleb, pointing. They looked, but by the time they turned their heads, the figure was gone. "You're just imagining things," Caleb said, but I wasn't so sure. Even now, years later, I still think about that Halloween. I never saw Jacob again, and no one ever talked about what really happened to him. But sometimes, on cold October nights, I'll catch a glimpse of something green out of the corner of my eye. And I'll wonder if he's still out there, waiting for the right moment to come back. It was a summer I'd never forget, the summer of 2015 to be exact. Miami was its usual hot, sticky self, the kind of heat that made you feel like you were melting every time you stepped outside. I was living in a cramped, run-down apartment on the edge of Little Havana, scraping by with odd jobs. At the time, I thought I was invincible. I thought I had the kind of street smarts that could get me anything I wanted. That's where I went wrong. It started small, as these things often do. A friend of a friend, someone I barely knew, told me about an easy way to make money. "You just swipe the cards," he'd said with a grin, showing me a small device that looked like a regular credit card reader. "We skim them, clone them, and cash out. Nobody gets hurt." At first, I hesitated. I wasn't some hardened criminal. I was just a broke 25-year-old who wanted more out of life. But the promise of fast cash was too tempting. My first job was at a gas station on the edge of town. I acted like a customer, slipped the reader over the pump's card slot, and walked away. It was so easy, it didn't even feel like a crime. For a while, it worked. I started seeing money like I never had before. I paid off my rent, bought new clothes, even treated myself to expensive dinners. But greed has a way of catching up with you. The more I got, the more I wanted. I started taking bigger risks, skimming cards at high-end stores, parking garages, and even ATMs. I felt untouchable, until I wasn't. One sweltering afternoon, as I sat in my apartment counting cash, there was a knock at the door. I froze. Nobody ever came to visit me unannounced. Peeking through the peephole, I saw two men in suits. My stomach dropped. They didn't look like salesmen. "Joshua Davis?" one of them said when I cracked the door open. His voice was calm but firm. Yeah, who's asking? I replied, trying to sound casual. Federal agents. We need to talk. The next hour was a blur. They searched my apartment, finding the cloning devices and fake cards I thought I'd hidden well. My stomach churned as they read me my rights. The ride to the station felt like an eternity, my mind racing with what would happen next. How had they found me? Did someone rat me out? Or was I just sloppy? At the station, they laid it all out. They had surveillance footage, witness statements, and a paper trail that tied me to dozens of fraud cases. I could barely defend myself. When they offered me a plea deal, 6 months in prison instead of facing years in court, I didn't even think twice. I signed the papers with shaking hands. Prison wasn't what I expected. In movies, it's always depicted as this violent, chaotic place where you're constantly watching your back. But when I arrived at the Miami Correctional Facility, I realized things were different for guys like me. Non-violent offenders were housed separately from the gang members and lifers. My block felt more like a strange, depressing dormitory than a prison. Still, the first night was rough. The metallic clang of the cell door closing behind me felt final, like a chapter of my life slamming shut. My cellmate, Jordan, was already lying on his bunk, reading a book. He was a wiry guy in his 30s with tattoos snaking up his arms. He glanced at me, nodded, and went back to his book. "First time?" he asked after a long silence. "Yeah," I admitted, sitting on the edge of the lower bunk. "Don't worry. Keep your head down. Don't mess with anyone, and you'll be fine." It wasn't comforting, but it was the only advice I got. Over the next few days, I started to adjust. The routine was monotonous. Wake up, eat, do assigned tasks, get some free time, and then back to the cell. During free time, I gravitated toward a group of guys who seemed approachable. Tony, Marco, and Rich. They were in for similar stuff: fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. We'd sit in the yard or the common area, playing cards and sharing stories about our lives outside. It was during one of these card games that I first noticed Ace. He wasn't part of our group, but he'd occasionally join us when someone needed a fourth player. At first glance, Ace didn't seem like much. He was thin, almost frail-looking, with short cropped brown hair and sharp, calculating eyes. He wore his prison uniform like it was a tailored suit, his posture straight and composed. But what really set him apart was his mind. Ace was a genius when it came to poker. He had this uncanny ability to read people, like he could see right into your soul. No matter how hard I tried to bluff, he'd always call me out. "You're nervous," he'd say with a faint smirk. "You always scratch your chin when you're lying." It wasn't just poker. Ace dominated at chess, too. He'd sit there silently, studying the board like it was a battlefield, then make a move that would leave the rest of us scratching our heads. "How do you do that?" Marco once asked, frustrated after losing yet another game. "Just practice." Despite his brilliance, Ace was an enigma. He rarely talked about himself, and when he did, it was always vague. "What are you in for?" Rich asked him one afternoon. Ace paused, his gaze distant. "Made some bad decisions," he said simply, then changed the subject. In prison, that was usually enough. Nobody wanted to press too hard, especially if someone didn't want to share. But Ace's mystery made him all the more intriguing. I found myself watching him during games, trying to figure him out. He had this calmness about him, like nothing could shake him. It was unnerving, but also fascinating. As the weeks turned into months, I settled into a rhythm. Life in prison was far from easy, but it was manageable. I counted down the days until my release, marking each one on a small calendar I kept in my cell. "Don't do that," Jordan warned me one night. "It'll drive you crazy." But I couldn't help it. Every mark was a reminder that I was one day closer to freedom, to seeing my family again. My parents had been furious when they found out about my arrest. My mom cried for days, and my dad barely spoke to me during our first phone call. But over time, their anger softened. They started sending letters, then money for the commissary. By the time I called them to tell them my release date, they were excited to have me home for Christmas. "Just promise us one thing," my mom said. "Promise you'll never do anything like this again." "I promise," I told her, and I meant it. One night, as I lay in my bunk staring at the ceiling, Ace's words from earlier that day replayed in my mind. "Cherish every moment with your loved ones," he had said after another chess game. There was something about the way he said it, like he truly understood what it meant to lose someone. For the first time, I wondered about Ace's past. What had he done to end up here? Was it something small, like the rest of us, or something bigger? The thought lingered as I drifted off to sleep. Looking back, I realized that was the moment everything started to change. Ace's words haunted me long after that chess game. Cherish every moment with your loved ones. It seemed simple enough, almost cliché, but there was a weight to it that I couldn't shake. He wasn't the kind of guy to speak in platitudes. If Ace said something, it was because he'd thought it through, dissected it, and decided it was worth sharing. But why? What made him say that? Lying in my bunk that night, I kept replaying our interactions over the past few months. Ace had always been a mystery, but now I couldn't stop myself from wondering about his story. There was a sadness in his eyes sometimes, like he was carrying something too heavy to bear. It was subtle, but once you noticed it, you couldn't unsee it. The next morning over breakfast, I decided to bring it up. Ace was sitting alone at a table near the window, staring out at the yard like he was lost in thought. I grabbed my tray and sat across from him. "Morning?" I said casually. He glanced up and gave a small nod. "Morning." I pushed my food around on my tray, trying to find the right words. "You know, that thing you said yesterday about cherishing time with family, it stuck with me." Ace didn't respond right away. He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving mine. "Good," he said finally. "It should." There was a finality to his tone, like he didn't want to talk about it anymore, but I wasn't ready to let it go. "Did something happen with your family?" I asked carefully. For a moment, I thought he was going to shut me down. His jaw tightened, and he looked away. But then, to my surprise, he leaned back in his chair and gave a faint smile. "You really want to know?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, leaning in. "I do." Ace took a deep breath, then leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "I'll tell you what," he said, his voice low. "Beat me at chess, and I'll tell you everything." Later that day, we met in the common area for our match. The other guys gathered around, sensing that this game was different. Normally, Ace treated chess like a casual pastime, but this time, there was an intensity in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. "You ready?" he asked, setting up the board. "Ready as I'll ever be," I replied. The first few moves were straightforward. I played defensively, trying to anticipate his strategy, but Ace was relentless. Every time I thought I had him cornered, he'd pull off a move that left me scrambling to catch up. "Come on, Josh," Marco teased from the sidelines. "Don't let him crush you like that." I ignored him, focusing all my attention on the board. My palms were sweating, and my heart was racing. This wasn't just about winning a game, it was about unraveling the mystery of Ace. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I made a move that left Ace visibly surprised. He stared at the board for a long moment, then let out a low chuckle. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, tipping his king over. "You got me." The crowd dispersed, leaving just me and Ace sitting at the table. He leaned back in his chair, studying me like he was deciding whether or not to keep his promise. "A deal's a deal," I reminded him. Ace sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right," he said, "but you're not gonna like what you hear." I braced myself as he began to speak. "My real name is Alex Carter," he said. "Back in 1994, I was just a kid. living with my parents and little sister in a small town in Ohio. On the outside, we looked like the perfect family. My dad was a lawyer, my mom was a teacher, and I was the straight-A student who played piano and helped out at church. But behind closed doors, it was a different story. He paused, his eyes clouding over. My dad was strict. That's putting it lightly. He had this temper, you know? He'd snap over the smallest things. If I forgot to take out the trash or got anything less than an A on a test, well, let's just say I learned to keep my head down. Ace's voice grew quieter. My mom tried to protect me, but there was only so much she could do. And then there was Emily, my little sister. She was only 8 at the time. She didn't understand why Dad was always angry. She thought if she just tried harder, he'd love her more. I felt a knot forming in my stomach. Whatever Ace was about to say next, I knew it wasn't going to be good. One night, things got bad, he continued. Really bad. My dad came home drunk and started yelling at my mom. I tried to step in, but he turned on me instead. I don't remember much after that. It's all a blur. But when I came to, my dad was lying on the floor, and my mom was screaming. Ace looked down at his hands, as if he could still see the blood on them. I didn't mean to hurt him. I just wanted him to stop. "What about your mom?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "She called the police," Ace said. "I was arrested that night and charged as an adult. They called it manslaughter, but the judge wasn't interested in the details. I was 15 when they sent me away." The room felt heavy after Ace finished his story. I didn't know what to say. What do you say to someone who's been through something like that? "I'm sorry," I said finally. It felt inadequate, but it was all I could manage. Ace shrugged. "Don't be. I've made my peace with it." "Do you ever hear from your sister?" I asked. He shook his head. "She changed her name and moved away. I don't blame her. After everything that happened, I wouldn't want to be reminded of it either." For the first time, I saw Ace as more than just a brilliant chess player. He was a man carrying a burden that most people couldn't even imagine. And yet, he'd found a way to keep going. After that day, I couldn't stop thinking about Ace's story. It made me question everything I thought I knew about people. In prison, it's easy to put people in boxes: non-violent offenders, lifers, gang members. But Ace didn't fit into any of those categories. He was something else entirely. The next time we played chess, I didn't care about winning. I just wanted to spend time with him, to learn from him. He had a wisdom that came from years of reflection, and I realized I had a lot to learn. "Thanks for telling me," I said as we set up the board. Ace nodded. "Just remember, Josh, your choices define you. Not your past, not your mistakes. What you do moving forward is what matters." It was advice I would carry with me long after my time in prison was over. But at that moment, it felt like a lifeline, a reminder that even in the darkest places, there's a way forward. After hearing Ace's story, everything felt different. It wasn't just about him. His words planted seeds in my mind, growing into questions I couldn't ignore. What were the stories of the others around me? The guys I played cards with, ate meals beside, shared jokes and complaints with. Who were they really? I started to see them not as inmates, but as people with lives outside these walls, lives that had spiraled into chaos. Each one of them had a story, a family, a reason they'd ended up here. And suddenly, I wanted to know. The day after my talk with Ace, I walked into the rec room to the familiar noise of dominoes clattering and laughter echoing off the concrete walls. Marco, always the loudest of our little group, was in the middle of a heated game with Kenny, while Darnell leaned back in his chair, keeping score with a smug grin. "Josh," Marco called, motioning me over. "You're late. We saved you a seat." Yeah, I said, sitting down. "Who's losing today?" "Not me," Marco said, slamming a domino on the table with exaggerated flair. "Kenny's on a streak of bad luck." Kenny rolled his eyes. Luck has nothing to do with it. You're cheating. The banter was familiar, comforting even, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't stop thinking about Ace, about the layers of his life hidden beneath his calm exterior. I wondered if Marco, Kenny, or Darnell had stories just as complex. "Hey Marco," I said after a while, "what's the first thing you're gonna do when you get out?" Marco looked up, surprised by the question. "Easy," he said, leaning back. "I'm gonna take my girl to the fanciest restaurant in town. Steak, wine, the works. Then I'm gonna propose to her. Been saving up for a ring." "Wait, you're engaged?" I asked. "Not yet," Marco said with a grin. "But she doesn't know that." The table erupted in laughter, but I couldn't help noticing the flicker of something deeper in Marco's eyes. Hope. Determination. "What about you, Kenny?" I asked. Kenny hesitated, his hand hovering over the pile of dominoes. "I don't know," he said finally. "Probably just spend some time with my mom. She's been holding it down for me, you know?" Darnell chimed in. "Man, you better get her something nice. Moms deserve that." The conversation drifted into jokes and plans, but I stayed quiet, listening. Each of them had someone waiting for them, someone they wanted to make things right for. It made me wonder, was anyone waiting for Ace? Later that evening, I found Ace in the library, flipping through a battered paperback. He looked up as I approached, raising an eyebrow. "Back for another game?" he asked. "Not today," I said, sitting down across from him. "I've been thinking about what you said, about choices and moving forward." Ace closed his book and leaned back in his chair. "And?" "I don't know," I admitted. "It's hard to imagine starting over when it feels like everything's already stacked against you." Ace nodded slowly. "It is hard," he said, "but hard doesn't mean impossible." We sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of whispered conversations and pages turning, filling the air. Finally, I asked the question that had been nagging at me all day. "Do you have anyone waiting for you? Outside, I mean." Ace's expression softened, but there was a sadness in his eyes. "Not anymore," he said. "My sister's the only family I have left, and she made it clear she doesn't want anything to do with me. Can't say I blame her." "Do you ever think about reaching out?" I asked. "Every day," he admitted. "But what would I say? Hey, remember me? The guy who ruined your childhood?" He shook his head. "Some things are better left alone." I wanted to argue, to tell him he deserved a second chance, but I knew it wasn't that simple. Ace wasn't just dealing with guilt. He was carrying the weight of a broken family, a past he couldn't undo. The following weekend, I had my first visitor in months. My sister Mia came to see me, her face lighting up as soon as she spotted me across the room. "Josh," she said, pulling me into a tight hug. You look better than I expected." "Thanks," I said, laughing awkwardly. "You look good too." We sat down at one of the metal tables, and for a while we just talked. She told me about her job, her new apartment, the dog she'd adopted. It was normal, everyday stuff, but it felt like a lifeline, a reminder that there was still a world waiting for me outside these walls. "So, how are you holding up?" Mia asked, her voice soft. "I'm okay," I said. "It's not easy, but I'm managing." She hesitated, then leaned in closer. "Mom and Dad wanted me to tell you. They miss you. They're not ready to visit yet, but they're thinking about it." My chest tightened. I hadn't spoken to my parents since the day I was sentenced. Hearing that they were even considering seeing me was more than I dared to hope for. "Thanks for telling me," I said. Mia smiled. "Of course, you're my brother. No matter what, we're in this together." After Mia left, I couldn't stop thinking about Ace. His sister had cut him off completely, but mine was still here, fighting for me, believing in me. It made me realize how lucky I was, and how much I didn't want to take that for granted. That night, I found Ace sitting in the corner of the rec room, watching a basketball game on the tiny TV. I sat down beside him, waiting for a break in the game before speaking. "You know," I said, "it's never too late to try. With your sister, I mean." Ace didn't look at me, but I saw his jaw tighten. "Why do you care so much?" he asked. "Because you gave me advice that changed my perspective," I said. "Now I'm returning the favor." He finally turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. "And what if she doesn't want to hear from me?" he asked. "What if reaching out just makes things worse?" "You won't know unless you try," I said. "But if you don't, you'll always wonder." Ace didn't respond right away. He just stared at the TV, lost in thought. But I could see the wheels turning, the seed of an idea taking root. Whether or not he'd act on it, I didn't know. But at least now, he was considering it. A week later, I was walking past the phones when I saw Ace standing there, the receiver pressed to his ear. He looked tense, his shoulders hunched, his free hand gripping the edge of the counter. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but the look on his face told me everything I needed to know. When he hung up and turned around, our eyes met. For a moment, I thought he was going to walk away without saying anything. But then he came over, his expression unreadable. "I called her," he said simply. "And?" I asked. "She answered," he said. "We talked. It wasn't easy, but it's a start." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Hope. Ace's decision to reach out to his sister sparked something in the rest of us. Marco started writing letters to his girlfriend, planning for their future. Kenny made a list of things he wanted to do for his mom when he got out. Even Darnell, who rarely talked about his personal life, opened up about wanting to reconnect with his estranged daughter. And me? I started writing to my parents. It wasn't easy. There was a lot of guilt to work through, but I knew it was worth it. Ace's story had taught me something important. No matter how broken things seem, there's always a chance to rebuild. It's not easy, and it doesn't happen overnight, but it's possible. And sometimes, that's enough to keep going. As the prison gates loomed larger in my mind, so did the uncertainties swirling within me. Ace's cryptic advice about cherishing moments with loved ones resonated deeply, but there was something unsettling about the way he said it. His voice was calm but heavy, as though it carried the weight of experiences I couldn't yet fathom. It was a weight I felt compelled to explore. Back in the dormitory, I couldn't help but notice how the atmosphere seemed different. Maybe it was always like this, but I had never paid attention before. The cliques of inmates, the strange smiles. After my conversation with Ace, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of something I didn't fully understand. It was as if the entire world had shifted around me, and for the first time since I'd been here, the prison didn't feel like a place of isolation, but rather a temporary chapter in a much bigger story. I spent the next few days mulling over the conversation in the library, trying to make sense of Ace's words. The more I thought about them, the more questions I had. Who was Ace really? What had driven him to the point of solitude that even his family had turned their backs on him? It was clear that Ace wasn't just another inmate. He was someone whose story was much darker and more complicated than he let on. And I couldn't help but wonder what it would take to really break through to him. The next morning, I found myself walking past the small bulletin board in the common area, my mind preoccupied with the details of Ace's past. I didn't know why I was so fixated on him, but I couldn't shake the nagging urge to know more. Perhaps it was the mystery of his silence, or maybe it was the vulnerability in his eyes the other night when he told me he had reached out to his sister. Whatever it was, I couldn't let it go. I walked past the board, which was cluttered with announcements for upcoming visits, work assignments, and recreational activities. But my attention was drawn to a small clipping pinned in the corner. It was a photo, faded and torn at the edges, of a young man standing beside a woman. They were both smiling, but the happiness on their faces seemed forced. The man looked familiar, but I couldn't quite place where I had seen him before. I pulled the paper down and squinted at it. The headline above the photo read, "Mitchell Overhand sentenced for brutal double murder." My heart skipped a beat. It was Ace. I had to sit down. My legs felt weak as the weight of the revelation hit me. The man I had been sharing my days with, the one who had been so distant and withdrawn, was someone with a history that was far darker than I had imagined. I quickly scanned the rest of the article. In 1989, when Ace was just 15 years old, he had shot both of his parents in their home. His father had been killed instantly, but his mother had suffered before she died. Afterward, Ace had buried them in a shallow grave in the backyard and proceeded to live his life as though nothing had happened, throwing a party with friends. The gruesome details of the murder were almost too much to process, but the most chilling part was how the article ended. Mitchell Overhand, now serving a 20-year sentence for the murders of his parents, shows no remorse for his actions. A cold shiver ran down my spine. This wasn't just the story of a kid who made a terrible mistake. This was the story of someone who had murdered his parents in cold blood and then went on to live a life of normalcy until he was caught. No wonder he kept to himself. I couldn't shake the images in my head. What kind of person could do something like that? And how had he become the Ace I knew? Quiet, composed, yet undeniably intelligent? Could a person truly change? Or was Ace just pretending to be something he wasn't, hiding behind a facade of self-control? I had to know more, but I couldn't exactly go up to him and ask. How do you approach someone about a past like that, especially when that someone was your cellmate, the person you played cards with and talked to every day? I spent the next few days avoiding Ace, unsure of how to act around him. I was still processing the information, and part of me didn't want to face the truth. I didn't know what was worse, knowing about his past, or the possibility that he'd never open up to me about it. Our interactions had changed since that night in the library. He no longer offered advice or philosophical thoughts. He kept to himself more, and I respected that, until I began to feel the weight of his silence pressing down on me. One afternoon, I found myself sitting at the lunch table with Marco and Kenny, picking at my food. My mind was 1,000 miles away, still reeling from the discovery about Ace. "Yo, Josh, you good?" Marco asked, eyeing me over the edge of his tray. "You've been off all week." I looked up, startled. "I'm fine," I said quickly, though the words felt empty even to me. "Just thinking." "About what?" Kenny asked, leaning in. I hesitated, not sure how much I should say. I had always been good at deflecting, at keeping my problems to myself, but there was something about their concern, about the way they were looking at me, that made me feel like I needed to open up. "It's Ace," I said, almost without meaning to. Marco raised an eyebrow. "What about Ace?" I glanced around, making sure no one else was listening. "I found something out. Something about his past." Kenny looked confused. "What do you mean?" I looked down at my tray, trying to gather my thoughts. "He's not who he says he is. His real name is Mitchell Overhand. He's the one who killed his parents when he was 15. It's all over the prison newsletter." Marco and Kenny exchanged looks, their faces blank for a moment, before Kenny broke the silence. "Wait, you're saying that the guy who's been teaching us how to play chess and giving us advice on life is a murderer?" I nodded, feeling a heavy knot form in my stomach. "Yeah, but I don't know. I don't think he's the same person anymore. He's changed. I mean, he's different than how the article describes him." Marco shook his head slowly, clearly trying to make sense of what I was saying. Damn, that's some messed up stuff right there. I don't know what to think. "I don't either," I admitted, my voice low. "But I want to know more. I can't stop thinking about it. What makes someone do something like that?" There was a long pause before Kenny finally spoke. "I don't know, man. Maybe it's not our place to figure it out. If he's doing his time, then he's doing his time. Maybe he's not the same person anymore. But I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if anyone could truly change after something like that. How could you ever escape the weight of killing your own family? A few days later, I ran into Ace in the hallway. He was walking toward the showers, his usual calm demeanor firmly in place. For a moment, I considered walking past him, pretending I didn't know. But something inside me, something that had been building ever since I found that article, pushed me forward. "Ace," I called, my voice hoarse. He stopped and turned, his expression unreadable. "What's up?" he asked quietly, his eyes scanning my face for signs of distress. I swallowed, gathering my courage. "I found out about you, about what happened with your parents." Ace's face didn't change, but I saw something flicker in his eyes, an emotion I couldn't place. Maybe fear, maybe regret. "I should have known it was only a matter of time before someone figured it out," he said softly. "I don't hide who I am, Josh. I can't. Not anymore." I didn't know how to respond to that. The words I had prepared, questions, anger, confusion, caught in my throat. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked instead. Ace looked down for a moment, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I didn't think you needed to know. I didn't think anyone needed to know. My past is mine, Josh. It's something I have to live with, but it doesn't define who I am now." I stared at him for a long moment, processing his words. Maybe he was right. Maybe his past didn't define him. But then again, how could I be sure? How could anyone be sure? "I don't know what to think," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to think anything," Ace replied. "But if you want the truth, I'll give it to you. No more lies. No more pretending." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his words settle deep in my chest. I didn't know where this conversation would lead, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to walk away from it. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. As Ace walked away, I realized I had no answers. No simple explanation for what had happened all those years ago. And maybe there wasn't one. All I knew was that life behind these walls wasn't as black and white as I had once believed. There were shades of gray, shadows beneath the surface that no one could escape from, no matter how hard they tried. And maybe, just maybe, Ace was still trying to escape. The days following my conversation with Ace felt like they stretched on forever. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between us. His confession wasn't some dramatic moment, but in the quiet aftermath, I found myself questioning everything. It wasn't just Ace's past that haunted me, it was my own. Was I really any different from him? Was I just another man in prison, pretending to be something I wasn't, trying to outrun the consequences of my own mistakes? I kept to myself for a while, trying to clear my head. I didn't want to talk to anyone, not even Marco or Kenny. My mind was full of questions that no one could answer, and it was easier to retreat into silence than to face the truth. The prison wasn't a place for introspection, yet that's all I seemed to do these days. Look inward, trying to figure out who I was and what I had become. But then, something unexpected happened. It was a Monday morning, the kind of day when the prison felt a little more alive than usual. The halls were full of activity as inmates shuffled between their cells and the common areas. I was sitting in the rec room, half-heartedly flipping through a book, when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps. I looked up to see Ace walking toward me, his face unreadable as usual, but his body language was different, more tense, almost as if he had something on his mind. He didn't say anything at first. He just sat down across from me at the table, folding his arms and staring at the wall. I didn't know what to say. The conversation we'd had a few days ago had left me in a daze, and part of me wondered if it had been a one-time thing. But Ace wasn't the type of man to sit in silence for long, especially not when something was bothering him. After a moment, he sighed heavily. "I didn't tell you everything, Josh." I waited, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Ace met my eyes for the first time since he'd sat down. There was a rawness in his gaze that I hadn't seen before. For a moment, I almost thought I saw regret in his eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "I didn't tell you why I really ended up here," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "Why I did what I did." I nodded, unsure of what he was about to say. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to," I said. But I knew even as the words left my mouth that I wanted to hear it. I needed to understand, even if I wasn't sure I was ready for the truth. Ace hesitated, then leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "I didn't just snap, Josh. It wasn't like that. There was more to it than just anger." He paused, his eyes darting around the room as if he were looking for someone, anyone, who might overhear. But the room was empty, except for us. I had a lot of anger, yeah, but I also had fear. And that fear, it consumed me. My parents, my mom especially, she wasn't exactly stable. She would lash out at me for the smallest things. I tried to make it stop, tried to keep the peace, but it never worked. Nothing ever worked. He stopped, his face tightening with emotion. I could see the pain in his eyes, the same kind of anguish I had seen when he first shared his past with me. But there was something new there too, something darker. I thought if I could just end the chaos, end the torment, things would get better. I didn't know how to deal with it. I was just a kid, and when it happened, when I killed them, it wasn't because I wanted to. It was because I couldn't see any other way out. The silence between us was thick, suffocating. I couldn't speak. My throat felt dry as I processed his words. I wanted to tell him that I understood, that I could see how he'd ended up where he was. But the truth was more complicated than that. How could I understand something as twisted as murder, especially when it was committed by someone who looked so much like a regular man? How could I empathize with a killer, even if that killer was a broken, misguided child when it happened? "I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Josh," Ace said, breaking my thoughts. "I don't expect anyone to forgive me. I don't even know if I can forgive myself. But I had to tell you. I had to tell someone. I've been carrying it for so long. And sometimes I think maybe that's why I've been so quiet. Maybe I'm trying to pay for it somehow. Trying to punish myself for what I did." His words hung in the air, heavy and burdensome. I didn't know how to respond. How do you respond to something like that? How do you process the fact that the person sitting across from you, someone you've gotten to know over the past few months, has committed something so heinous? "I don't know what to say," I admitted, my voice trembling despite myself. Ace gave me a small, almost sad smile. "You don't have to say anything, Josh. I'm not asking for anything from you. I just needed to get it out." The days that followed that conversation were some of the hardest I'd faced since being here. There was something about Ace's confession that changed everything. The walls of this prison, which had always felt so solid and unyielding, now felt flimsy, like they were closing in on me. I couldn't stop thinking about the things Ace had said, and I couldn't escape the crushing reality that I too was serving a sentence I'd imposed on myself when I made my decision to take the plea deal. My thoughts drifted back to my family. I hadn't heard from them since my arrival at the prison. Sure, they had visited a couple of times in the beginning, but after a few months they stopped coming. I couldn't blame them. My actions had destroyed the trust we once shared. I had taken the easy way out, thinking I could fix things later, but later never seemed to come. I thought about what Ace had said, about trying to punish himself for his past. It hit me then that maybe I too was doing something similar. I was hiding behind the walls of this prison, refusing to face the consequences of my actions, hoping that by serving my time, I could somehow make up for the mess I had created. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. It was a Friday afternoon when the decision came. I was sitting in the common area, playing cards with Marco and Kenny, when I saw Ace standing by the door, his face obscured by the shadows of the hallway. I hadn't spoken to him since that conversation days earlier, but something told me that I needed to talk to him now. I stood up abruptly, leaving the game behind. Marco and Kenny didn't say anything. They could see I was troubled. I made my way toward Ace, my heart racing in my chest. As I approached him, he turned, his eyes meeting mine. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said," I finally said, my voice low. "About your parents. About everything." Ace didn't respond at first, but I could see him waiting for me to continue. "I don't know what it's like, Ace. I don't think I'll ever understand what happened. But I know one thing. We're all just people here. We've all made mistakes. We're all trying to make it through somehow." Ace's expression softened, just slightly. "I'm not asking for sympathy, Josh. I'm not asking for anything." "I know," I said, shaking my head. "But I think we're all in this together. We all have something to make up for. Maybe that's why we're here. Maybe we need to face what we did and find a way to live with it." Ace studied me for a moment, and then nodded slowly. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to live with it," he said quietly. "But maybe, just maybe I'll try." In the end, there were no easy answers. There was no magical moment of redemption, no sudden epiphany where everything clicked into place. But there was a shared understanding between us. We were both men trying to make sense of a broken world, a world we had helped shatter in our own ways. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start rebuilding. As the days wore on, I found myself talking more to Ace, no longer just as a cellmate, but as someone who understood what it was like to carry the weight of regret. Our conversations were never easy, but they were real. And for the first time since I'd stepped into this place, I felt like I wasn't alone. Maybe redemption wasn't about fixing everything. Maybe it was about accepting the consequences of our actions and finding a way to live with them. And maybe, just maybe, that was a start. The days dragged on after that conversation with Ace, each one blending into the next like an endless stream of gray. I couldn't tell if I was waiting for something to change, or if I was simply trying to get through each day without succumbing to the weight of regret that had taken root in me. It wasn't just about my past anymore. It was about everything. My time in prison, the people I'd hurt, the life I'd destroyed. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in, and no matter how hard I tried to fight against it, the pressure only seemed to grow. Ace and I had formed an unspoken bond in the days after that conversation, but it was fragile, held together by the quiet understanding that we both carried the same kind of burden. He never spoke much about his past again. He didn't need to. It wasn't necessary for us to go over it again and again. The truth had been said, and that was enough. But there was a shift in the air between us, something unspoken, yet understood. We were no longer just inmates passing time in this hellhole. We were two men who had been broken by life, struggling to find some semblance of meaning in the wreckage. I tried to keep busy in the meantime. I spent hours working out, doing everything I could to distract myself from the swirling thoughts in my head. But no matter how many push-ups I did, or how many miles I ran on the prison yard, I couldn't outrun the memories. The faces of my family, my friends, the people I had betrayed, they all haunted me, following me through every step of my days. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had failed them in the worst possible way, and that thought gnawed at me like a persistent hunger. One afternoon I found myself in the mess hall sitting alone at a table. I was eating my bland, tasteless meal when I saw Marco and Kenny walk in. They spotted me immediately and came over, plopping down across from me. I gave them a half-hearted smile, but it didn't reach my eyes. They could both tell something was off. "Yo, man," Marco said, leaning forward. "You all right? You've been quiet lately, what's up?" I shrugged, pushing my food around on the tray. "Just thinking," I said, though I wasn't sure if that was the real reason. It felt like a convenient excuse, a way to avoid the truth. Kenny raised an eyebrow, glancing at Marco before looking back at me. Thinking about what? I opened my mouth to say something, but the words stuck in my throat. How could I explain what I was feeling? How could I put into words the swirling storm inside me that made me feel like I was suffocating? I didn't know how to talk about the guilt, the regret, the weight of the mistakes I had made. "I don't know," I said finally, sighing. "Just life, I guess." They exchanged a look, both of them silent for a moment before Marco spoke again. "You've been in here for a while now. You ever think about getting out? About what you're gonna do when you're free?" I froze, my fork hovering in midair. The question hit me like a punch to the gut. Getting out. Freedom. It was something I hadn't thought about in months, not in any real sense. Sure, I had planned for the future before I was locked up, made grand ideas of what I would do when I was free again, but now, it felt like those plans were buried under layers of shame and uncertainty. How could I go back to the world that I had ruined? How could I look my family in the eyes after everything that had happened? "I don't know," I said again, setting my fork down. "I've been thinking about it, but I don't think things will ever be the same. I screwed up too bad, Marco. I hurt people. I betrayed them." "You're not the only one who's messed up, man," Kenny said, his voice gentle but firm. "We all have our demons. But you can't let that define you. You can't keep punishing yourself." "I don't know if I can ever forgive myself," I whispered, more to myself than to them. "You have to try," Marco said, his eyes serious. "You can't move forward if you're stuck in the past." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I sat there looking down at my hands. I hadn't realized how much I'd been carrying until that moment. The weight of my decisions, the weight of the years I had stolen from the people who loved me. How could I ever make amends? How could I ever undo the damage I'd caused? The following week, I received a letter. It wasn't anything special, just a simple envelope with my name written in my mother's familiar handwriting. I hadn't heard from her in months, not since I'd been locked up. At first, I was afraid to open it, afraid of what it might say. Maybe it would be a harsh letter, telling me that I had ruined everything and there was no chance of redemption. Maybe it would be a letter that confirmed all my fears, that I was truly alone in the world, abandoned by everyone who had ever cared about me. But when I finally opened it, I found something different. "Dear Josh, I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I know things aren't good right now. I know I've been distant, and I'm sorry for that. It's just been hard for me to cope with everything, especially with the hurt you've caused. But I want you to know that I still love you, even if it doesn't feel like it sometimes. I don't know what the future holds for you. I don't know if you can ever make things right. But I believe in you, Josh. I believe that you can find your way. You have to forgive yourself, though. It's the only way to heal. You don't have to do it all at once, but you need to try. And if you're ever ready to come home, I'll be here. Love, Mom." The letter was short, but it hit me like a tidal wave. I sat there for a long time, reading it over and over again, the words blurring through my tears. My mother still loved me. She still believed in me. For the first time in months, I felt like maybe, just maybe, there was hope. Maybe I wasn't as lost as I thought. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about that letter. It had stirred something deep inside me, a longing for redemption, for healing, for a chance to make things right. But I also knew It wasn't going to be easy. I had a long road ahead of me, one filled with hard work and painful self-reflection. I couldn't just wake up one day and be the person I wanted to be, but I could start by forgiving myself, by accepting that I had made mistakes and that I had to live with the consequences. And then, one evening, Ace found me again. He approached me in the rec room, his usual calm demeanor replaced with something else, a quiet intensity. "Josh," he said, his voice low, "can I talk to you?" I nodded, standing up and following him to a quieter corner of the room. Ace's face was etched with the same weariness I had seen in him before, but there was something different now. He seemed lighter. Maybe it was the weight of the truth that he had shared with me, or maybe it was something else, but I could see it in his eyes. He was beginning to accept what had happened, to make peace with it in his own way. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," Ace said after a long pause. "About forgiveness, about moving forward." I waited, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel the gravity of this moment, the air between us thick with the weight of our shared struggle. "I don't know if I can ever really forgive myself," Ace said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I think maybe I can try." I nodded slowly. "I think that's all we can do, Ace. Just try. Every day." There was a long pause before Ace spoke again, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. "You're right, you know," he said, "about one thing. We're all just people here. We all have our demons. But maybe, just maybe, we can find our way out." And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like maybe we could. My name is Finn, and this story happened almost a year ago. I still remember it clearly because it was one of the strangest and scariest things that ever happened to me. Before I tell you what happened, let me introduce myself and my friend, because that's important to understand the story. I live in a small town in the middle of nowhere, and I've always been kind of a quiet guy. I like to read, play games, and explore the outdoors. My best friend, Luke, is a little different. He's loud and always coming up with crazy ideas, but that's what makes him fun to hang out with. He's also the one who convinced me to go on this hike, which was how everything started. One day it was a cold Tuesday afternoon, and the sky looked like it might rain. Luke called me and asked if I wanted to go for a hike. Normally, I might have said no, but I was in the mood to get out of the house. We both loved nature, and I didn't mind a little rain. So, we packed some snacks, grabbed our jackets, and drove about 40 minutes to a hiking trail we'd never been to before. When we arrived, we were excited. The parking lot was empty, which was unusual. It felt like we had the whole forest to ourselves. We started walking on the trail, talking and joking around, enjoying the peaceful silence of the woods. The trees were beautiful with their leaves turning red and orange, and the rain made everything look even more magical. After a while, Luke stopped and pointed ahead. "Do you see that?" he asked, his voice sounding a little uncertain. I looked around but didn't notice anything strange. "See what?" I asked, but Luke kept staring ahead through the trees. Finally, he said, "Look over there. It looks like a person. Do you see that face staring at us?" I squinted my eyes and tried to focus. Sure enough, about 20 feet away between the trees, there was something that did look like a face. It was weird because it didn't move, just sat there, staring. It didn't look like a person, but more like a shape that your eyes tricked you into thinking was one. We both walked closer, and as we did, the face didn't move. I shrugged it off. "It's probably just some kind of optical illusion or a weird spot in the trees," I said, trying to convince myself it was nothing. When we finally got close enough, we saw that it wasn't a face at all. It was a mask, a cheap plastic mask nailed to the side of a tree. It blended in so well with the tree bark and the branches that if you didn't look carefully, you wouldn't have seen it. I didn't know what to think, but we decided to take a picture of it just because it was so strange. Then Luke, always the curious one, reached up to pull the mask off the tree. I tried to stop him, but he didn't listen. "What if it's part of some Halloween event or something?" I said. But Luke didn't care. He pulled the mask off, and when he turned it over, something fell out from inside. It was a small folded-up note. We opened the note and it said, "Number 1, go behind this tree and keep walking until you find number 2. At first I thought it was just part of a prank or some kind of event the park was doing. But Luke wasn't so sure. "This seems too strange for that," he said. "This tree is way off the path. Why would they put something like this here if it was just for a Halloween event?" I wasn't convinced, but the rain started pouring down harder, and I wanted to finish the hike and get back to the car. But Luke, of course, wanted to follow the note. "Come on, Finn. Let's just see what happens," he said, grinning like a kid who'd just found a treasure map. I sighed and reluctantly followed him as we went behind the tree and continued walking. After a little while, we found another mask lying in the dirt. This time, it was even more hidden, nearly buried under the leaves. Luke lifted it up, and sure enough, there was another note inside. It was just like the first one, except this one said, "Number 2, continue on, and you will find number 3. We kept walking and found a third mask, then a fourth, and finally a fifth one. Each note led us deeper into the forest, and by the time we reached the last mask, I was feeling nervous. The final note just said, "See you soon." That gave me chills. I looked at Luke, and we both laughed nervously, trying to brush it off as just some weird game. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. My stomach turned, and the sounds of the rain and wind started to feel louder, almost like there was something following us. We started walking back to the trail, and I kept hearing strange noises around us, like something moving through the trees. Luke seemed too caught up in the mystery of the masks to notice, but I was starting to feel uneasy. Finally, we made it back to the parking lot, and I was relieved to see that no one else was around. But when we got to my car, there was a strange car parked right next to mine. It was so close that I had to move the car forward just so Luke could get in. We talked about the masks on the way home, still trying to figure out if it had been part of a prank or some weird event. I dropped Luke off at his house and went back to my place, trying to forget about the whole thing. Later that night, after watching a football game, I was getting ready for bed. It was about 11 p.m. when I heard something outside. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but for some reason, that night I decided to look out the window. What I saw made my blood run cold. There were 5 people standing on my front lawn, wearing the same exact masks from the hike. I froze, staring at them. They were just standing there, doing nothing. Then, without warning, they started moving in strange ways, like they were dancing or celebrating. It was so odd. I didn't know what to do, so I ran upstairs to my bedroom and called the police. I watched from the window, my heart racing. Every now and then, the masked figures would run to the front door, ring the doorbell a few times, and then run back to the yard, acting like they were having fun. I told myself it was just a prank, but it didn't feel right. It felt too real, too creepy. Then, things got worse. Instead of just ringing the doorbell, they started banging on the door with their fists and bodies, shaking the whole house. I could feel the vibrations in the floor as they hit the door over and over. Finally, after what felt like forever, I saw the lights of the police cars coming down the street. The moment the masked people saw the lights, they scattered into the night. The police chased after them, but they didn't catch anyone. I gave my statement, but there wasn't much they could do. There was no proof, and since nothing had been stolen or damaged, the police said there wasn't anything they could do. The next day, I bought a security camera for my front door, just in case they came back. It's been a whole year now, and nothing has happened since. But I still wonder, were they just playing a prank, or was there something more to it? I guess I'll never know. All I can do is hope they never come back. The year after that night was strange, to say the least. I tried to convince myself that the whole thing was just a prank, that maybe those people were just bored and trying to scare someone for fun. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Every time I heard a car drive past my house at night, I would look out the window, half expecting to see those same masked figures standing there. I even started locking my doors earlier than usual, just to be safe. I don't know why I felt so uneasy. After all, nothing ever really happened. The police didn't find any signs of forced entry or anything that suggested it was anything other than some weird stunt. But something about it, it was just too much. Too strange. Too deliberate. I couldn't just forget it, no matter how much I tried. Luke, on the other hand, had completely brushed it off. He kept telling me that it was just a weird prank and we should move on. "It's been a year, Finn. You're overthinking it. No one's coming back," he'd say every time I brought it up. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. A few months passed, and life started to feel normal again. The sound of those people banging on my door faded from my mind, and the memory of the masks almost felt like a bad dream. Until one evening, about 6 months after the incident, I was getting ready for bed when I heard it. A soft knock on my door. I froze, my heart racing. My first instinct was to check the security camera feed on my phone. Nothing. No movement. No one there. I felt silly for even thinking about it, but I couldn't shake the thought of the masks and the people from that night. Maybe it was just someone lost, or maybe it was a neighbor needing help. But I didn't move. The knocking came again. This time louder, more persistent. I waited a moment before grabbing my phone. My hands were shaking as I dialed Luke. I needed someone to talk to, someone who would understand why I was so freaked out. He picked up on the first ring. "Finn? What's up?" he asked, his voice casual. "Luke, there's someone knocking on my door," I said, barely able to get the words out. It's happening again." There was a pause on the other end. "What do you mean, happening again? Is someone messing with you?" His voice was skeptical, but I could hear the concern in it. "I don't know," I whispered. "I don't know what to think, but it's the same feeling, the same creepy vibe. I feel like they're out there again, those same people from the masks. Something's wrong." Luke didn't respond for a few seconds. "I'm coming over, all right? Stay on the phone with me." I sat there, clutching the phone to my ear, trying to listen for any movement outside. The knock didn't come again, but the tension in my chest was unbearable. I could hear Luke's voice in my ear, but it felt like the walls were closing in on me. Finally, Luke arrived at my house, and I opened the door to let him in. He had a worried look on his face, but tried to act calm. "All right, let's check this out," he said, as if nothing was wrong. We walked around the house together, looking for anything unusual. The front door, the back door, and all the windows were locked. Everything seemed fine, but I still felt that prickling sensation. It all started one fall when I decided to explore the Whispering Pines forest in Oregon. Everyone called it that because the wind always sounded like someone whispering through the thick trees. I thought it was just a name, nothing to worry about. I loved hiking alone, away from the noise of town and the distractions of home. I was 19 years old, confident I could handle a few days alone in the woods. The plan was simple: backpack through the forest for 4 days. I had everything I needed: my tent, food, a map, and some warm clothes since fall was colder than usual. I was looking forward to the adventure. Whispering Pines wasn't as popular as other hiking spots, so I expected peace and quiet. By the third day, I was deep into the woods, about 20 miles away from any road. I hadn't seen a single person. The quiet was soothing, though the cold had settled in more than I thought it would. That morning, I woke up early, made coffee on my small stove, and packed up. My next campsite was 6 miles ahead. 6 miles in the forest might not seem like much, but with the rough trails, it could take hours. I felt good as I hiked. The air was fresh, the sun was soft, and the trail was empty. Just me and nature. About 4 hours into the hike, something strange happened. I was walking up a steep hill when I heard footsteps ahead of me. At first, I was confused. The footsteps sounded fast, but no one had been around for days. I looked up, and there he was. A man. He was walking down the trail, coming straight toward me. He wasn't carrying anything. Not a backpack, no water, no tent, nothing. All he wore was a long-sleeved gray t-shirt and old hiking pants. That's it. His clothes didn't even look warm enough for the cold weather. I smiled politely as he walked past. "Morning," I said, just to be friendly. He didn't say anything back. He didn't even look at me. He just kept walking, his eyes staring straight ahead. It felt weird, like I wasn't even there. I stopped for a second and turned around to watch him. I don't know why. Maybe because seeing someone in the middle of nowhere, especially someone carrying nothing, was strange. But just as I looked back, he turned his head too. Our eyes met for a split second. I froze and quickly turned back around, pretending I hadn't noticed. My heart was beating faster now, but I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he had a campsite nearby, I thought. Or maybe he just liked to hike light. I came up with excuses to calm myself down. After all, what were the chances of running into someone like that out here? The hike felt longer after that. The silence around me wasn't as comforting anymore. It felt heavy. Every snap of a twig made me look over my shoulder. Was he behind me? I tried to brush it off. He's just another hiker, I told myself over and over. When I finally made it to the campsite, I was exhausted. It wasn't what I expected. The area was small and surrounded by tall, dark trees. I'd hoped for a view of the mountains or a valley, but it felt like I was boxed in. I didn't care though. My legs were tired. I dropped my bag, set up my tent, and sat on a log to watch the sunset. The sky turned a mix of orange and red, but the shadows from the trees made it feel darker than it should have been. That's when I heard it. A shuffling sound behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly fell off the log. Standing there, about 15 feet away, was the same man I'd seen earlier. He had no bag, no tent, still nothing. He was just sitting there on the ground, staring off into the forest like I wasn't even there. How did he get here? He'd been walking the other way earlier. For him to reach this spot, he would have had to turn around and hike faster than me. My stomach dropped. None of it made sense. I didn't want to stare at him, but I couldn't help it. The man looked like he was in his late 30s. He had a short, scruffy beard and tired-looking brown eyes. He wasn't doing anything. He was just sitting there. I tried to stay calm. Maybe he's harmless, I thought. Maybe he's lost. But I couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling in my chest. The sun dipped lower, and the campsite grew dark. The man didn't move. He just sat there, staring into the trees. I was too scared to say anything, so I kept my distance. I tried to focus on my camp, pretending everything was fine. But my hands shook as I packed away my dinner. Finally, I decided I couldn't stay there. I needed to leave. I started taking down my tent, trying to be quiet about it. That's when I noticed something. The man was watching me now. His eyes were locked on me, and he didn't look away, not even once. My heart raced. I shoved my gear into my backpack as fast as I could. I wasn't thinking anymore, I just needed to get out. As soon as I strapped on my pack, the man stood up. He didn't say anything. He didn't yell or wave or ask where I was going. He just stood there, staring at me as I walked away. I walked fast, my boots crunching the leaves under me. I didn't dare look back until I was far enough down the trail. When I did, I saw him. He was following me. I didn't run. Running would make too much noise. I kept walking, faster and faster, listening for his footsteps behind me. I didn't know what he wanted, but I knew I couldn't let him catch up. After a minute, I made a decision. I turned off the trail and into the trees. It was dark now, so dark I could barely see where I was going. I moved carefully, stepping over roots and pushing through branches. Then I stopped and hid behind a tree. I held my breath and listened. A few seconds later, I heard his footsteps on the trail. He was close, too close. I peeked around the tree and saw his shadow moving in the dark. He stopped right where I'd left the trail. "Hey!" he yelled. His voice echoed through the trees. It wasn't angry. It was friendly, like he was trying to trick me. "You don't have to hide," he called. "I'm not gonna hurt you. Come on back." I stayed completely still. For what felt like forever, he just stood there, looking around. Then, without a word, he walked into the woods, on the other side of the trail. I lost sight of him after that. The forest fell quiet again, but I didn't move. I stayed behind that tree for what must have been an hour. My legs hurt, my back ached, but I was too scared to move. Finally, I forced myself to stand up. I didn't go back to the trail. I stayed in the woods and walked until I couldn't walk anymore. I pushed through the forest, stumbling over roots and rocks as the darkness swallowed everything around me. The only sounds were my labored breathing and the faint rustling of leaves. My flashlight flickered in my hand, its beam barely cutting through the pitch-black shadows. Every few steps, I stopped to listen. I thought I could still hear him, his footsteps somewhere in the distance. Maybe I was imagining it, but I couldn't take any chances. I had no idea where I was going. My goal was simple: get far away from that man. I couldn't go back to the trail, not yet. He was out there somewhere, and I didn't trust him. I walked for hours, my body aching from exhaustion. My backpack felt heavier with every step. I knew I couldn't keep going forever. I needed to stop, but the thought of staying in one place terrified me. Finally, I found a small clearing. It wasn't much, just an open patch surrounded by dense trees, but I couldn't go on. I dropped my pack and sat down, my heart still pounding. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my water bottle and took a sip. I needed to calm down, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. Who was that man? Why was he following me? I didn't have answers. I told myself he could be a lost hiker, but everything about him was strange. His clothes, his silence, the way he just sat there at my campsite watching me pack up. And now, he was out here, somewhere in the dark. I thought about setting up my tent, but what if he found me? Instead, I wrapped myself in my sleeping bag and leaned against a tree. I'd rest for a little while, just enough to get my strength back. But sleep didn't come easy. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the howl of the wind, made me sit up, wide-eyed, scanning the shadows. My flashlight dimmed as the batteries started to die, and I felt even more exposed. It felt like the forest was closing in on me, like I wasn't alone. And maybe I wasn't. I must have dozed off because I woke up to a sound that made my blood run cold. Footsteps. Soft, slow footsteps. They were close, so close I could hear the crunch of leaves beneath them. My eyes shot open and I froze. The clearing was darker now, almost impossible to see in, but I could hear someone moving. The footsteps stopped. I held my breath, listening. "Hey," a voice whispered. It was him. I knew it was him. My heart hammered in my chest and I gripped the small camping knife in my hand. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. "Are you out here?" he called softly, almost playfully. "I know you're close." He was walking again, circling the clearing. I could hear him moving, pacing through the trees. I stayed perfectly still, hoping the darkness would hide me. My fingers tightened around the knife handle, though I didn't know what good it would do if he found me. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. Finally, the footsteps started to fade. I heard him moving farther away, back into the trees. I didn't dare move until the forest fell silent again. When I was sure he was gone, I crawled out of my sleeping bag and packed everything up as quickly as I could. My hands were trembling so badly that I dropped my flashlight twice. I couldn't stay here. I needed to keep moving. I forced myself to push forward through the woods, even though I could barely see where I was going. I tripped over roots and stumbled through thorny bushes, but I didn't care. I had to keep moving. The forest felt alive around me. Every tree, every shadow seemed to be watching me. At some point, I spotted something ahead through the trees. A faint, orange glow. My first thought was fire, maybe another camper's campsite. Relief rushed through me. Maybe I wasn't alone out here after all. I hurried toward the light, ignoring the cuts on my legs and hands. As I got closer, the glow became clearer. It wasn't a fire. It was the dim light of a lantern hanging from the branch of a tree. Beneath it was a small, crumbling wooden structure. I stopped, suddenly unsure. It looked like an old ranger's cabin or maybe a hunting shack. The wood was rotting, and the windows were covered in grime. But why was there a lantern? Who put it there? I debated whether to approach or turn back. The lantern flickered slightly, as if swaying in the wind. My instincts screamed at me to leave it alone, but I couldn't help myself. I stepped closer to the shack. The door was slightly open, and the inside was dark. I didn't see anyone. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. No answer. I stepped closer, the light from the lantern casting long shadows across the ground. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Footprints. Fresh footprints leading to the shack. They were his. I knew they were his. I turned to leave. I didn't want to be anywhere near that shack, but just as I stepped back, I heard a noise, a thud coming from inside. I froze. The sound came again, like something moving inside. My pulse quickened. What do I do? I glanced back at the trees. I could run. I should run. But before I could move, the door creaked open wider. And then, the man stepped out. It was him, standing in the doorway of the shack. His face was partially hidden by the shadows, but I could see enough to know it was him. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't angry. He just stood there looking at me. I stumbled back, my heart racing. "What do you want?" I shouted. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward, slowly. I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. I turned and ran. I tore through the woods, branches whipping at my face. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps crashing through the leaves. He was faster than I thought. I didn't dare look back. I just ran. My lungs burned, and my legs screamed in pain, but I didn't stop. I didn't even know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't let him catch me. I ran until I couldn't run anymore. My legs gave out, and I collapsed against a tree, gasping for air. My chest heaved, and my entire body felt like it was on fire. I listened, straining to hear his footsteps. Silence. Had I lost him? I hoped so, but I didn't trust it. The man was still out there somewhere, and I had no idea where I was. I pulled out my map, but it was useless now. I had gone too far off the trail. I tried to think straight, but panic clouded my thoughts. The forest was silent again, but not in a peaceful way. It felt wrong, like the quiet was hiding something. I thought about my options. Do I keep moving, or do I try to find shelter? Before I could decide, I heard something. A soft sound, far off but growing closer. Footsteps. My heart sank. He was still out there, looking for me. I stayed frozen, my back pressed against the rough bark of the tree as the footsteps drew closer. My heart was pounding so hard that I was sure he could hear it. The crunching of leaves underfoot grew louder, and I knew I had to move. My body was shaking, but survival instinct took over. I pushed off the tree and crept through the forest, crouching low to avoid being seen. Every step felt impossibly loud, but I couldn't stop. The flashlight was dead, so I had to rely on the faint moonlight filtering through the branches above. The trees loomed around me like dark sentinels, their spindly branches reaching out like hands. The footsteps continued, but this time I realized something strange. They weren't coming directly toward me. They were circling, like he was looking for me but didn't know exactly where I was. I crouched behind a large fallen tree and peered into the shadows. My hands gripped the edge of the bark, splinters biting into my skin. "Where are you?" His voice called out softly. It wasn't loud, but it carried through the woods like a chilling breeze. His tone was unnervingly calm, almost sing-song. "You can't hide forever." I bit down on my lip to keep from making any noise. The man's shadow passed between the trees, just far enough that he didn't see me. I watched him, my breathing shallow. He moved strangely, almost robotic, his head turning slowly from side to side as he scanned the woods. He still had no backpack, no flashlight, nothing. I stayed still until he finally disappeared into the darkness again. The forest was silent once more, but I knew I didn't have much time. I needed to move, and I needed a plan. Staying in the woods wasn't an option. I was cold, lost, and scared out of my mind. But the thought of going back to the trail terrified me. What if he was waiting for me there? I decided to keep moving deeper into the woods. If I could stay ahead of him until morning, I'd have a better chance of finding my way back. The hours dragged on as I trudged through the forest. I lost track of how long I'd been walking. It could have been minutes. It could have been hours. My body ached with exhaustion, but fear kept me moving. I could barely see where I was going. The forest was too dense, the branches above blocking out most of the light. I kept expecting to hear him again. The footsteps, the voice. But there was nothing. Just silence. Too much silence. My mind began to play tricks on me. Shadows shifted in the corner of my vision, and I thought I saw figures moving between the trees. I shook my head, trying to snap myself out of it. Get it together, I thought. You're just tired. Keep moving. Eventually, I stumbled into another small clearing. My knees buckled, and I fell onto the soft earth. I was done. I couldn't go any farther, not without a break. I pulled out my water bottle and drained the last few sips. My stomach rumbled, but I didn't dare take out food. If he was still nearby, the sound of the wrapper might give me away. I leaned back against a boulder and stared up at the sky. The moon was almost hidden behind dark clouds, and the air felt colder now. I thought about home, about my bed, about my friends. It felt like another world. Then I noticed something. Carved into the boulder beside me were deep scratches. At first I thought they were natural, but as I ran my fingers over them, I realized they were deliberate. Words. Someone had scratched words into the stone. My flashlight was dead, so I couldn't read them fully, but I could make out fragments. Not alone. Watching. Run. My blood ran cold. Who had written this? And when? I stood up quickly, my fear returning. I didn't want to stay there another second. I grabbed my pack and hurried back into the woods, not even caring which direction I was going. The first drops of rain hit me as I stumbled through the trees. It started light at first, barely noticeable, but within minutes it turned into a heavy downpour. The sound of rain pounding on the leaves drowned out everything else, and I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. On one hand, the sound would cover my movements. On the other, it also meant I wouldn't hear him coming. The rain was freezing. My clothes were soaked through and I was shivering uncontrollably. I needed shelter, anything to get out of the storm. That's when I saw it. Through the trees, a faint yellow light glowed. It was distant but unmistakable, flickering in the rain. My first instinct was to turn away. After everything that had happened, I didn't trust it, but I couldn't stay in the rain. If I didn't find shelter, I'd freeze out here. I moved cautiously toward the light, my heart pounding with every step. Finally, the trees opened up, and I saw it. A cabin. Small and old, just like the shack from earlier. but this one looked more intact. A faint glow of light seeped through one of the windows, and smoke curled from the chimney. Smoke? My stomach dropped. Someone was inside. I hesitated at the edge of the clearing, torn between fear and desperation. I needed shelter, but what if it was him? I looked around the cabin, scanning for any sign of movement. The door was closed. The windows were dark except for the faint light. I had to take the risk. I approached the door slowly, every step making my heart pound harder. When I reached the porch, I hesitated again, then raised my hand and knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I reached for the doorknob, and to my surprise, it turned easily. The door creaked open, and I stepped inside. The cabin was dark and smelled of damp wood. The only light came from an old oil lantern sitting on a table. There was a fireplace in the corner, where faint embers glowed, but the fire was dying. "Hello?" I called softly. No answer. I scanned the room, but it looked empty. There was a table, a chair, and a small bed pushed up against the far wall. It didn't look like anyone had lived here in a long time. I shut the door behind me and dropped my pack onto the floor. My body was so cold that I could barely move. I grabbed the lantern and carried it over to the fireplace. If I could get the fire going again, maybe I could warm up and dry off. I searched for firewood and found a small pile stacked near the wall. I threw a few logs onto the embers and stoked the fire until flames began to flicker back to life. As the room filled with a faint orange glow, I started to feel a little safer. I sat down near the fire, holding my hands out to the warmth. My clothes were still soaked, but at least I wasn't freezing. Then I noticed something. There was a jacket draped over the back of the chair. It wasn't old. It looked new, like something someone had just taken off. I stared at it, my mind racing. Someone had been here recently. Before I could think any further, a sound made me jump. The door. The handle was turning. The sound of the door handle turning sent a jolt of terror through me. My body froze as I watched it twist slowly, the soft creaking of the wood blending with the sound of rain pounding against the roof. My mind screamed for me to move, to hide, but I was paralyzed. The door creaked open an inch, then another. The wind rushed into the cabin, blowing the firelight around and casting wild shadows on the walls. I couldn't see anyone at first, just the darkness of the night outside. Then, a figure stepped into the doorway. It was him, the man from the trail, the man who had followed me. He stood there, soaking wet, his face obscured by the shadows, but I knew it was him. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, staring at me. I scrambled to my feet, knocking over the lantern. The glass shattered, and the room plunged back into darkness except for the dim glow of the fire. I backed up toward the corner of the room, grabbing the first thing I could find, a small metal poker for the fire. I gripped it tightly in my shaking hands. "Who are you?" I stammered, my voice trembling. "What do you want?" He didn't answer. Instead, he took a slow step into the room. His clothes were soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead. There was something horribly off about the way he moved. Slow, deliberate, like he wasn't really there. I tightened my grip on the poker. "Don't come any closer," I shouted. He paused, as if considering my words. For a moment, he just stood there, rain dripping onto the wooden floor. Then, without warning, he spoke. "You shouldn't be here." His voice was soft, but it made my blood run cold. "What do you mean?" I demanded. The man tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "You came too far," he said. "This place isn't for you." I felt a wave of anger bubbling up under my fear. "Then why are you following me?" I yelled. "Why are you out here? Who are you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he took another step toward me. I could see his face more clearly now, the short, scruffy beard, the hollow look in his eyes. It was as if there was something missing behind them. Something human. "I said stay back!" I screamed, swinging the fire poker in front of me. The motion seemed to startle him. He stopped for a moment, then slowly turned his head toward the corner of the room. At first, I thought he was looking at nothing. Then I followed his gaze. There, in the shadows beside the bed, was another mark. A carving etched into the wood. My eyes widened as I realized what it was. A symbol. It looked like a crude figure, a stick man with a hollow circle for a head. My breathing quickened. There were scratches all around it, like someone had tried to carve it over and over again. The man's voice broke through the silence. "You need to leave." He took another step toward me. I couldn't take it anymore. My fear snapped into action, and I lunged forward, shoving him aside with all my strength. He stumbled, but I didn't wait to see what happened next. I bolted for the door, throwing it open and running into the storm. The rain hit me like a wall, soaking me to the bone as I sprinted into the dark forest. I didn't look back. I didn't care if he was following me. I just needed to get away. The cabin disappeared behind me, swallowed up by the trees. My mind raced as I ran. What had he meant by, "This place isn't for you"? What was that symbol? Why was he out here, and what did he want? None of it made any sense, but I knew one thing. I had to find my way back to civilization before it was too late. I didn't stop running for what felt like hours. My legs ached, my lungs burned, but the fear kept me moving. The storm raged around me, thunder rumbling overhead, the rain soaking my clothes and turning the forest floor into mud. I stumbled more than once, but I forced myself to keep going. Eventually, I couldn't run anymore. I collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath. My whole body was shaking, partly from the cold, partly from terror. I looked around, but the forest was pitch black. The storm had swallowed up all the light. I felt like I was losing my mind. Nothing made sense anymore. Who was that man? Why was he following me? And why did I feel like I wasn't alone out here? Not just because of him, but because of something else? I forced myself to stand up again. I had to keep moving. I remembered the direction I had come from earlier in the day and tried to follow it back, using the faint slope of the ground to guide me. The hours dragged on, but slowly, the storm began to let up. The rain lightened, the wind calmed, and the forest grew still. Finally, as the first hints of dawn broke through the clouds, I saw something that made my heart leap. A road. It was faint, little more than a dirt path cutting through the trees, but it was real. I stumbled toward it, my exhaustion threatening to overwhelm me. I reached the road and collapsed onto the muddy ground. I didn't care how dirty I was. I was safe. The nightmare was over, or so I thought. As I lay there catching my breath, I heard something faint in the distance. Footsteps. My blood ran cold as I looked up. There, standing at the edge of the forest, was the man. He was far away, just a shadow among the trees, but I knew it was him. He wasn't moving, just watching me. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline surging through me. I didn't wait to see what he would do. I ran down the road, not stopping until I saw the faint outline of a small ranger station in the distance. When I finally reached help, I was a mess. I stumbled inside, soaking wet, babbling about the man in the woods, the strange cabin, and the symbols carved into the walls. The ranger looked at me skeptically at first, but let me warm up and call for help. Over the next few days, I tried to explain everything that had happened. The local authorities checked the area I described, but they found no cabin, no man, no signs of anyone living out there. I don't know what I saw or who he was. Maybe he was some drifter. Maybe the woods had driven him mad. Or maybe, just maybe, he was something else entirely. All I know is that I'll never go back to those woods again. And sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I can still see his shadow standing there, at the edge of the forest, watching, waiting. My name is Emery, and this is a story I've never told anyone before, not even my closest friends. It happened when I was 12 years old. My parents had just moved us to a small town called Black Hollow. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, but strangers were always greeted with suspicion. My dad got a job as the town's only mechanic, and my mom worked at a diner on the main street. Life was quiet. Too quiet. At the edge of town was a thick forest that the locals called the Whispering Woods. Everyone warned us kids not to go there. My best friend back then was a boy named Alaric. He was 13, lanky, and always wore an old baseball cap his grandpa had given him. Alaric was the kind of kid who loved to break rules, not because he was bad, but because he was curious. He had a knack for telling stories, and he claimed the woods were cursed. "You can hear them," he whispered one day after school. "The whispers. They call to you if you get too close." I laughed at him then, but deep down I believed him. I'd heard the stories from other kids, about strange lights floating between the trees, about people disappearing and never coming back. The adults always brushed it off as nonsense, but we kids knew better. Then there was Celine, a girl who had moved to town just a month before us. She was quiet and always carried a notebook where she scribbled little drawings of birds and trees. Alaric said her mom had gone missing in the woods years ago, and Celine believed the forest had taken her. She never smiled, but she seemed to know things no one else would dare to talk about. One crisp October afternoon, Alaric dared us to go into the woods. "It's just trees," he said, adjusting his cap. "If we stick to the trail, nothing will happen." "I don't think we should," Celine muttered. She was twisting the strap of her backpack nervously. "The woods aren't safe. My mom used to say they're alive." I rolled my eyes, trying to act braver than I felt. "It's just a story, Celine. There's no such thing as haunted forests." But the truth was, I didn't want to go either. The woods loomed dark and heavy on the horizon, even in daylight. But Alaric had that way of daring you to do things you didn't want to do. So an hour later, the three of us stood at the edge of the trail, staring into the shadowy trees. We didn't see anything strange at first. The air smelled like damp leaves, and the trail crunched under our shoes. Alaric led the way, swinging a stick he'd picked up like it was a sword. Celine kept glancing over her shoulder, and I tried to focus on the path ahead, ignoring the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. "See?" Alaric said after a while. "No whispers, no ghosts, no monsters." But then Celine froze. She was staring at something up ahead, a small wooden carving hanging from a tree branch. It looked like a doll, but it had no face. Instead, its head was covered in strange markings that reminded me of the symbols Celine sometimes drew in her notebook. "My mom told me about these," she said quietly. "They're warnings. We should go back." Alaric laughed, but it sounded forced. "It's just some weirdo's art project. Come on." We kept walking, but the deeper we went, the quieter the forest became. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the sound of our breathing and the crunch of our footsteps. And then, we heard it. A whisper. It was faint, like wind slipping through cracks in a door. But there was no wind. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. I stopped and grabbed Alaric's arm. "Did you hear that?" He nodded, his face pale. Even Celine looked scared now. "We need to leave," she said firmly. But before we could turn back, the whispering grew louder. It wasn't just one voice. It was many, overlapping and tangled, speaking words I couldn't understand. The air felt heavy, like the forest itself was pressing down on us. "Run," Celine whispered. "Now." We took off down the trail, but it was like the forest had changed. The path twisted and turned in ways it hadn't before, and no matter how far we ran, the whispers stayed with us. My chest burned, and my legs felt like jelly, but I didn't dare stop. Then, out of nowhere, Alaric tripped and fell hard. Celine and I skidded to a stop to help him up, but when we did, we saw them, figures standing between the trees. There were 3 of them, shrouded in shadows. Their faces were pale and blank, like the doll we'd seen earlier. They didn't move, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Celine grabbed my hand and yanked me forward. "Don't look at them," she shouted. We ran blindly, the figures seeming to follow us without moving. The forest grew darker, the trees closer together. My heart pounded so hard, I thought it might burst. Finally, we burst out of the woods and collapsed onto the grass, gasping for air. The whispers stopped. We never talked about what happened that day. Not to each other, not to anyone. Alaric stopped going on adventures, and Celine moved away a few months later. I think she knew something terrible would have happened if we'd stayed in those woods. As for me, I've never set foot in Black Hollow again. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the whispers and I wonder, did we escape the woods, or did they let us go? I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those blank faces standing in the shadows, watching us. I kept hearing the whispers, faint and distant like a memory trying to claw its way back. The next day I tried to tell my mom what had happened, but she brushed me off. "You kids and your imaginations," she said with a laugh. "Stay out of those woods, Emery. They're dangerous." That was all she said before handing me a plate of pancakes and moving on like it was just another day. But it wasn't another day. At school, I found Alaric sitting alone at lunch. His baseball cap was pulled low over his face, and he was stabbing at a slice of pizza with his fork. Normally, he'd be telling jokes or plotting his next big adventure, but now, he just sat there, silent. I slid into the seat across from him. "Hey," I said softly. He didn't look up. "You tell anyone?" It all started because of my friend Jonas. Jonas was the boldest kid in our neighborhood, always coming up with wild ideas for adventures. He had shaggy blonde hair, freckles, and a loud laugh that could make anyone smile. But that summer, his laugh wasn't as loud. Something about him seemed off. Then there was Alina. She was quieter, always reading spooky books and scribbling in her notebook. If Jonas was the leader, Alina was the brains of our group. She had dark curly hair and always carried a little flashlight in her bag, just in case. And me? I'm Lane, like I said. I'm usually the one trying to keep everyone out of trouble, but somehow I always get roped into these things. It started on a lazy summer evening. Jonas had been acting strange for days, and when I asked him what was wrong, he finally said, "I found something in the woods. You guys need to see it." Alina and I exchanged a look. The woods behind our neighborhood were huge, full of twisted trees and strange trails. Our parents always told us not to go too far in, but Jonas looked serious. "What did you find?" Alina asked. Jonas hesitated, scratching the back of his neck. "It's hard to explain, it's weird, but you'll believe me when you see it." We agreed to meet at the edge of the woods after dinner. When we got there, the sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Jonas was already waiting, holding a flashlight. "This way," he said, leading us down a narrow trail. As we walked, the trees seemed to grow taller, their branches weaving together like a roof. It got darker and quieter, except for the crunch of leaves under our feet. Finally, Jonas stopped. "There," he whispered, pointing ahead. At first, I didn't see anything. But then I noticed it. A ring of stones, perfectly arranged in a circle. In the center was a small, twisted tree that looked like it had been burned. "What is this?" Alina asked, stepping closer. "I don't know," Jonas said. "But when I found it, I thought I heard whispers." I laughed nervously. "Whispers? Like what?" Jonas shrugged. I couldn't make out the words, but it was like they were coming from the tree. "Maybe it's just the wind," Alina said, though she didn't sound convinced. "Let's go back," I said. "It's getting late." But Jonas wasn't ready to leave. He walked closer to the tree, staring at it like he was in a trance. "I think it's alive. Alina and I exchanged another look. "Jonas, come on," I said, grabbing his arm. Reluctantly, he followed us back to the trail. But as we walked away, I could have sworn I heard something. A faint whisper, like someone calling my name. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that burned tree and heard those whispers. I told myself it was just my imagination, but deep down I wasn't so sure. The next day, Jonas was even weirder. He showed up at my house looking pale and tired. "I went back last night," he said. "What? Why?" I asked, shocked. "I don't know," he admitted. "I just had to. And it was different this time." "Different how?" "The tree," he said. "It moved." I didn't believe him at first. But when Alina came over, she said she'd been having nightmares about the tree too. She even drew a picture of it in her notebook, and it looked exactly like the real thing. "We need to figure out what it is," she said. Jonas nodded. "Let's go back tonight." I didn't want to go, but I didn't want to be the only one left out either. So we agreed to meet at the woods again after dark. This time, it was scarier. The woods felt colder, even though it was summer. The shadows seemed to stretch and move as we walked deeper in. When we reached the tree, it looked the same, but the whispers were louder now. "Do you hear that?" Jonas asked. Alina nodded, her flashlight shaking in her hand. "It's like they're talking to us." Jonas stepped into the circle of stones, and suddenly the whispers stopped. "Jonas, get out of there," I shouted. But he didn't move. He just stood there staring at the tree. "It's not a tree," he said softly. "It's a door." "A door to what?" Alina asked. Jonas turned to look at us, and for a moment, his face didn't look like his own. It was like something was using him, speaking through him. "A door to them." We pulled Jonas out of the circle and ran back to the neighborhood, but that wasn't the end of it. After that night, the whispers followed us. We heard them in the wind, in the creak of the floorboards, even in our dreams. Jonas stopped coming to school, and when I visited his house, his parents said he was resting. One night I woke up to find my bedroom window open. Outside I saw footprints leading away from the house, bare footprints, like someone had walked through the woods without shoes. Alina and I decided to confront the tree one last time. We gathered supplies, a circle of salt, candles, and the strange symbols Alina had found in one of her books. When we reached the tree, it looked bigger, darker, like it had grown since the last time. We lit the candles and drew the circle around us, chanting the words Alina had written down. The whispers grew louder, the shadows twisting into shapes that looked almost human. The tree seemed to pulse, its branches reaching toward us. "Keep going," Alina shouted. The ground shook, the whispers turning into screams. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. When we opened our eyes, the tree was gone. The circle of stones was still there, but the whispers had vanished. We never talked about it again, and Jonas eventually came back to school. But he wasn't the same. None of us were. So, kids, remember this. If you ever find a strange tree in the woods, don't get too close, because some doors should never be opened. Sure, let's dive back into the world of Lane, Jonas, and Alina to extend and deepen the story. After that night, life wasn't normal for any of us. We avoided talking about the tree or whatever it was, but the memory lingered like a shadow we couldn't escape. Jonas, who used to be the boldest among us, became distant and quiet. Alina buried herself in her books. Her once playful curiosity now turned into a wary obsession with the unknown. And me? I just tried to pretend everything was okay. But every night I'd wake up with the same feeling, like something was watching me from the darkness. Weeks passed, and for a while I thought the nightmare was over. Then one evening, Jonas called. "Lane," he whispered, his voice trembling. "It's back." "What's back?" I asked, though I already knew. "The tree," he said. "It's not gone, it's closer." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Closer? What do you mean?" "It's in my backyard," Jonas said, his voice cracking. I grabbed my bike and rode to Jonas's house as fast as I could. When I got there, Alina was already waiting outside, clutching her notebook. "You saw it too?" she asked. I nodded. "No, but Jonas called me." We found him sitting on his porch, pale and shaking. His backyard, which usually looked like any other suburban lawn, now had an unnatural feel to it. At the far edge, where the fence met the woods, the burned tree stood. Its twisted branches seemed to stretch toward the house like they were reaching for him. "It wasn't there yesterday," Jonas said. "I swear." Alina opened her notebook and flipped to a page filled with scribbles and symbols. "I've been researching this," she said. "The tree isn't just a door. It's a tether." "A tether to what?" I asked. "To whatever's on the other side," Alina said. "And now it's anchored here, to Jonas." "Why me?" Jonas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because you stepped into the circle," Alina said. "You let it in. We decided to stay at Jonas's house that night. We didn't want to leave him alone, and honestly, none of us felt safe anywhere else." As the sun set, the shadows in the backyard grew longer, and the tree seemed to loom closer, even though it hadn't moved. We sat in Jonas's room, trying to come up with a plan. Alina was sketching symbols again while Jonas paced back and forth. "We need to break the tether," Alina said. "If we don't, it'll keep getting stronger." "How do we do that?" I asked. "We have to destroy the tree," Alina said. Jonas stopped pacing. "What if it doesn't work? What if it makes things worse?" Alina didn't answer. Around midnight, we heard the whispers again. At first, they were faint, like the wind rustling through the trees, but they grew louder, more distinct. They were calling our names. Jonas, Alina, Lane. We huddled together, too scared to move. Then Jonas's bedroom door creaked open. "Did you lock that?" I whispered. Jonas nodded, his eyes wide with fear. Something was in the house. We crept downstairs, Jonas holding a baseball bat and Alina clutching her flashlight. The whispers were louder now, echoing through the halls. When we reached the living room, we saw it. A shadowy figure standing by the window, its form flickering like it wasn't fully there. Its face, or what should have been its face, was a swirling void. It turned toward us, and the whispers stopped. For a moment, none of us moved. Then the figure pointed at Jonas. "You are mine," it said, its voice like dry leaves scraping together. We ran back upstairs and locked ourselves in Jonas's room. Alina frantically flipped through her notebook, muttering under her breath. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Looking for a way to ban Jonas, Alina, Lane." We huddled together, too scared to move. Then Jonas's bedroom door creaked open. "Did you lock that?" I whispered. Jonas nodded, his eyes wide with fear. Something was in the house. We crept downstairs, Jonas holding a baseball bat and Alina clutching her flashlight. The whispers were louder now, echoing through the halls. When we reached the living room, we saw it. A shadowy figure standing by the window, its form flickering like it wasn't fully there. Its face, or what should have been its face, was a swirling void. It turned toward us and the whispers stopped. For a moment, none of us moved. Then the figure pointed at Jonas. "You are mine," it said, its voice like dry leaves scraping together. We ran back upstairs and locked ourselves in Jonas's room. Alina frantically flipped through her notebook, muttering under her breath. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Looking for a way to banish it," she said. "I think it's tied to Jonas because of the circle. If we can sever the connection, it might leave." "How?" Jonas asked, his voice trembling. Alina pointed to the symbols she'd drawn earlier. "We have to perform a cleansing ritual. It's risky, but it's our only chance." The ritual required us to confront the tree one last time. We gathered everything Alina said we'd need: candles, salt, and an old mirror she found in her attic. I grew up in a little town called Hollow Creek, tucked away in the heart of nowhere. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and you didn't have to lock your doors most nights. But there was one year when everything changed, and folks didn't feel so safe anymore. This story is from that time, and I still get chills thinking about it. I was 19 and had just started working as an overnight assistant at the town's only convenience store. It wasn't a big job, but I liked it because it gave me time to read and listen to my favorite mystery shows on the old portable radio in the break room. My boss, Mr. Clayton, a grumpy but kind-hearted old man, was usually around during the day, but at night it was just me and my coworker Wyatt. Wyatt was 24, a laid-back guy who always wore a beat-up leather jacket and loved telling tall tales about the weird things that happened in Hollow Creek. "Don't ever brush this place off," Wyatt would say. "Hollow Creek has secrets, and you never know when one might creep up on you." I thought he was just messing with me, but one night I found out he wasn't. It was a cold Friday night in late October. The wind was howling outside, rattling the windows, and Wyatt had stepped out to pick up some late-night tacos from the food truck down the street. I stayed behind to keep an eye on the store. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world has gone still. I remember stocking shelves near the candy aisle when I heard the bell above the front door jingle. "Be right there," I called, assuming it was Wyatt coming back with the tacos, but no one answered. I peeked around the aisle, and that's when I saw him, a tall man with wild, unkempt hair and a long black coat that looked like it hadn't been washed in years. His face was pale, almost ghostly, and he was staring at the freezer section like he was trying to decide on something. I felt uneasy, but I figured he was just a drifter passing through. Hollow Creek didn't get many strangers, but it happened every now and then. "Can I help you find something?" I asked, forcing myself to sound polite. He turned to look at me, and I swear his eyes were like two black holes, empty and cold. He smiled, a slow, unsettling smile that didn't reach his eyes, and said, "I'm just looking for something fresh." I stayed behind the counter, watching him closely as he wandered the aisles, muttering to himself. He wasn't buying anything, just pacing, like he was waiting for something. My gut told me to stay cautious, so I kept one hand near the phone, ready to call Wyatt or the cops if things got weird. When Wyatt finally came back, the man was still there. Wyatt noticed him immediately and whispered, "Who's that guy?" "I don't know," I whispered back. "He's been wandering around for 20 minutes. Wyatt gave me a look, the kind that says, "This is bad news." He walked up to the man and said, "Hey buddy, you planning on buying something? If not, we're gonna have to ask you to leave." The man turned to Wyatt, his strange smile returning. "I've already found what I need," he said, and then, to my horror, he pulled a long, rusty knife from his coat. The next few moments felt like a blur. Wyatt yelled for me to call the police, and I fumbled with the phone as the man started walking toward us. He wasn't running or rushing, just walking, calm and steady, like he had all the time in the world. "Stay back," Wyatt shouted, grabbing a broom from behind the counter and holding it like a weapon. The man tilted his head almost like he was amused. Then he lunged. Wyatt swung the broom, knocking the knife out of the man's hand, but the guy didn't stop. He grabbed Wyatt by the jacket and shoved him into a shelf, sending cans and boxes crashing to the floor. I was frozen for a moment, but then I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a heavy jar of pickles, and threw it as hard as I could. It hit the man on the back of the head, and he staggered, giving Wyatt enough time to get back on his feet. The man didn't give up, though. He snarled like a wild animal and started coming toward me. I backed up against the counter, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Just when I thought I was done for, Wyatt tackled him from behind, knocking him to the ground. "Go lock the door," Wyatt shouted. I ran to the front door, locking it and flipping the closed sign. The man was thrashing on the floor, screaming things I couldn't understand, his voice guttural and inhuman. Wyatt pinned him down until the police arrived, which felt like an eternity. When the cops finally took him away, one of them, a tall, no-nonsense woman named Officer Harlow, told us that the man was wanted in several states for attacks on store clerks. "You two are lucky," she said. "He's dangerous." That night, Wyatt and I sat in the break room, too shaken to finish our tacos. "I told you Hollow Creek has secrets," Wyatt said, his voice uncharacteristically serious. I didn't argue with him. After that night, I started locking the store doors early, even if it meant losing a few late-night customers. I never wanted to see another midnight visitor like that man again. And now, every time the wind rattles the windows, I can't help but think about that pale face, those black eyes, and the way he smiled like he already knew how the story would end. The tale of the midnight visitor continued. Wyatt and I didn't talk much after that night, at least not about what had happened. He tried to make jokes to lighten the mood, saying things like, "Guess I'm a hero now. Should get a medal or free tacos for life." But his laugh was hollow, and I could tell he was just as rattled as I was. The police had told us the man would be locked up for a long time, but it didn't help much. Every creak of the floorboards or gust of wind against the windows made my stomach churn. A few nights later, I was back at the store alone. Wyatt had taken the night off, saying he needed a break, and I didn't blame him. I thought about asking Mr. Clayton to let me work a day shift instead, but I needed the extra pay that came with nights, so I tried to convince myself that everything would be fine. After all, what were the chances of something like that happening again? The night started quietly enough. I spent the first few hours organizing the candy aisle and restocking drinks in the coolers. Around 11 p.m., a few regulars came in, a couple of truckers on their way to the highway, and an old man named Mr. Grady who always bought scratch-off lottery tickets. They kept me busy, and for a while, I felt almost normal. But then the clock struck midnight, and the store went quiet again. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the only person left in the world. I was wiping down the counter when I heard a sound, a faint tapping, like fingernails on glass. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The tapping was coming from the front door. Slowly, I turned to look, and my breath caught in my throat. Standing outside was a woman. Her face was pale, almost as pale as the man's had been, and her long, dark hair hung in wet strands around her face. She was barefoot, wearing a tattered dress that looked soaked, even though it hadn't rained in days. Her eyes were wide, almost too wide, and she was staring straight at me. "Ma'am, we're closed," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't move. She just stood there, tapping her nails against the glass in a slow, rhythmic pattern. Tap, tap, tap. I grabbed the phone, my hands trembling, and dialed Wyatt. He didn't pick up. "Come on," I muttered, hanging up and trying again. Still no answer. When I looked back at the door, she was gone. A wave of relief washed over me, but it didn't last long. I heard the tapping again, this time coming from the side window near the candy aisle. I walked over, my legs feeling like they were made of lead, and peeked through the blinds. She was there, her face pressed against the glass, her eyes locked onto mine. I stumbled back, knocking over a display of potato chips, and when I looked again, she was gone. I ran to the door and double-checked the lock, my fingers fumbling with the deadbolt. Then I grabbed the broom from behind the counter, clutching it like a lifeline. I told myself it was just a prank, some kid trying to mess with me. But deep down I knew it wasn't. The store phone rang, the sudden sound making me jump. I snatched it up, hoping it was Wyatt or the cops. "Hello?" I said, my voice shaking. There was no answer, just heavy breathing on the other end. "Who is this?" I demanded, but the line went dead. I was about to call the police when the power went out. The overhead lights flickered once, then went dark, leaving me standing in the middle of the store with nothing but the faint glow of the emergency exit sign. My breath came in short gasps as I fumbled for the flashlight we kept under the counter. When I turned it on, the beam of light landed on the front door. The woman was inside. She was standing just a few feet away, her wet hair dripping onto the floor, leaving dark puddles around her bare feet. Her head was tilted to the side, and she was smiling, a slow, eerie smile that sent chills down my spine. "How did you get in here?" I whispered, backing away. She didn't answer. She just started walking toward me, her bare feet making no sound on the tile floor. I raised the broom, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. "Stay back," I shouted. Her smile widened and she stopped. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the only sound the faint hum of the emergency lights. Then she spoke, her voice soft and cold. "They always come back." Before I could ask what she meant, the door burst open, and Wyatt came running in, a flashlight in one hand and a crowbar in the other. "What's going on?" "I got your call," he shouted. I turned to point at the woman, but she was gone. The puddles on the floor were the only sign she'd ever been there. Wyatt looked around, his eyes wide. "What happened? Are you okay?" I tried to explain, but my words came out in a jumbled mess. Wyatt checked the doors and windows, but everything was locked. There was no sign of a break-in, no sign of her at all. We called the cops, but they didn't find anything either. They said it was probably just some local playing a prank, but I knew better. That smile, those words, they weren't something I'd imagined. After that night, Wyatt started working every shift with me. We never saw the woman again, but the memory of her still haunts me.